Joel Kotkin, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Yeah, my pleasure. I qualify as a dad, I guess.
Well, this is a very philosophical dad show, and I'm going to take a little time to read your CV for the viewer. For those who don't know you, I have been following your writings, especially about urbanism and what's happened in our cities for a long time. And you are a professor at Chapman, and Nolan, one of our producers, was like, "Oh, Joel Kotkin's coming into town." So, okay. This is it now. I'm in middle age, so I have to do this. So you're the Roger Hobbs Presidential Fellow in Urban Futures at Chapman University. You are considered America's Uber geographer, according to the New York Times. You've written several books, including The City here, and more recently, this one, which I'm very excited for us to talk about, The Coming Neo-Feudalism, which, feels prescient and challenging on a lot of fronts. And just before we started recording, you said that you were teaching a class about AI and society, which for our kids in particular, it's a really difficult thing to think about and navigate. And as a parent, it's difficult to guide in a meaningful sense. Like, what do you do in the world that is coming, that is so unknown? And the leading lights are saying things like the spectrum of what we're being told by the people we would theoretically trust on this is pretty wide, including absolute apocalypse. So why don't we start there? You're teaching this class. How are you grappling with artificial intelligence and the future of our kids?
Well, I'm teaching it with a data scientist, so and who tends to be a little more optimistic about it than I am, which is good for the class, I think. I would say that what we're finding is a couple things. When we taught last year, we taught a class of graduate students. I would say half the people in the class thought they were going to lose their jobs. There was a guy running a warehouse. There was a guy running a factory. There were a couple of women in HR. One of the women would say, we would get, 5,000 applications and we would spend a month reading applications. Now they shove it into AI. Now, I think there's some horrible things that come of it, but that's going to be a big problem. Certainly, the coder culture is being devastated. We even had a show the other day, a class the other day, where a guy who was one of the originators of the Lion King, worked for Disney, started showing us AI shorts, and it's not too far from. From something very good. And then, you think about, why don't you have an AI movie? You don't need William Shakespeare to write, the 35th version of Star Trek. A machine could do a better job than the doofuses who write them now. I mean, you read things like you see what they did with The Foundation. It was like a criminal. It's. So I think that there's a real challenge. Now, here's the upside, I think. You got to start with the idea, what can a human do that a machine can't? Now, there's a whole path with plumbing and, specialized electricians. There's an enormous demand for them, and there will be a demand for them for a long time. Mechanics, people can fix machines. That's going to be one. Another's going to be medical. That's going to continue. I don't think I'm going to want to, in my dotage, which is probably sooner rather than later. I really wouldn't like to have a robot take care of me. And I think certain creative things, synapses that happen in the human brain that can happen on a machine that's dependent on old material. The fear I have is we'll have a generation of people who couldn't tell the difference anyway.
All right, real quick. If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It lets YouTube know that you want to see more Dad Saves America, and it helps spread the word. So it's one of the best things you can do to support what we're doing. And now, back to the show.
It's one of these things that at the most basic level, there's this argument that's hard to grapple with, which is, if you're going to turn to ChatGPT to help you write or help you even research and then quickly summarize things for you, so you're really just reading the AI summary
Right.
of content,
Right.
not going back to the original or not even synthesizing it, just asking it to.
And it's giving you Wikipedia, which itself is compromised and mediocre. I don't let them use Wikipedia.
Well, you end up with something that some people are saying is already causing essentially like cognitive decline, that
Yes.
there's a laziness, that you're not using your brain, and if you don't use it, you lose it. And the pushback is something like, we had the same worries about the calculator, that the calculator would reduce our mathematical capabilities as people. We shouldn't use it. So how do you deal with the sort of give and take of those kind of arguments that like, this is just another tool? Look, it's like, yeah, we're weaker because we use machines. We don't need muscles the way we used to, but that's not bad. That's just part of technological progress. How do you grapple with that?
Well, I think you could have two things happening at the same time. There are great advantages and a lot of, very positive things, and it does make certain things easier. But on the other hand, we have to look at, and I would talk about this in the book, the digital revolution. AI is just the acceleration of the digital revolution. It's taking it another step. So what happened during the digital revolution? Some good things and some bad things. Geography became very bifurcated, and certain areas became ridiculously expensive and certain areas declined. The same thing is, you had a social media culture which is almost tearing the country apart now. I don't think that was particularly positive. And I think that there's a great degree, I think, of people who now, when you used to get the newspaper, we talk about this in class, you used to get the newspaper and you'd read articles, and sometimes you read an article you didn't think you'd be interested in, but, I didn't know that this was happening in Ethiopia. Because I'm not on the Ethiopia news site, even though I have Ethiopian students. I said, I would run into that. Today, you're just getting what you have in the past wanted. So you're just getting the same stuff. So for instance, my wife has very smart, liberal friends who say to her, "Oh, well, Arabs can't vote in Israel." I said, "There have been Arabs in the Knesset from day one, and they're 22% of the electorate. What are you talking about?" But if you read NPR and you read the New York Times and you follow the party line, you're not. I mean, it's like when we had this recent Jimmy Kimmel thing with But you got to think, what universe does Jimmy Kimmel live in? Or Heather Cox Richardson. She's supposed to be smart. I don't know. Didn't seem so smart to me. How do people come up with these ideas? People will ask me, say, "Well, I wonder who shot so and so," and I said, "Well, I don't know. Well, why don't we find out?" Always seemed to me as a reporter, I wanted to get the facts.
Yeah, the Jimmy Kimmel thing, which will fade in memory, but it's just the latest example of these institutions that are supposed to be doing some kind of job that makes them worthy of being elite. Don't do any of it. They literally don't do any of it.
Right.
He has a whole team of writers that cost like $100 million a year. And days after the news is clear, at least it seems like it is, they're completely unaware.
And, I was perfectly willing if they said, "Oh, this guy was really, he thought Charlie Kirk was, too far to the left or something," because they are insane people of every variety. But it turned out to be this, and there seems to be a bit of a pattern here. Now, I think, Trump has Trump is like an amoeba, you push him and he goes in a certain direction. So I don't necessarily think his reaction was good. I thought that Governor Cox of Utah was spectacular, and I thought she was great.
Yeah. To stay on AI, help me. What is this class like? So and why are you teaching it?
Well, I'm teaching it because this is a question every kid is asking. 80% of millennials think that AI is going to have an effect on them. So, we're trying to say, here's what's going on. Here's the good part. Here's the bad part. We've had, we have people with educational products from AI. I mean, it could be a restructuring that's very positive. Now, one of the things that we're concerned with is the class implications, obviously. because you're going to have this big class. The most dangerous group of any society is overeducated, underpaid people. They are the most dangerous. And
Dig into that for a minute. What do you mean by that?
okay, like even in the Tsarist Russia, we had this, which was, you have people who went to school, got a discipline of some sort, and expected, had been told by their parents and by their teachers and by their guidance counselor, you get that master's in,
classics.
Well, classics would be useful, but in marketing or gender or it could be a lot of different things, and you're entitled to a job which will allow you to afford to live in New York City or San Francisco. It didn't work. So what you get is this resentment. So you've had, if you look at rebellions throughout history, it's largely this class that sparks them. It's generally not the peasantry and even the working class by itself that's doing it. You look at the people around Lenin. Most of those people were well educated. Lenin was from like sort of the bottom part of the aristocracy. So and high up in the Russian administration. The French Revolution filled with underemployed lawyers. So this is the class. They're articulate, they're capable of organization, and they're resentful. They feel, in some cases, the resentment is okay, but they feel that the society doesn't recognize their value. And now we have a new factor, which is people saying, I deserve to live in the place I want to live in. When we moved to Orange County, it would have been nice to live in Newport Coast, but I couldn't afford to live in Newport Coast. We all make these choices. Now, my generation, we had fewer restrictions. We could still go to Los Angeles. When I moved to Los Angeles, it wasn't particularly expensive relative to other places. But today it is. And so these kids are going to have to make a choice. Do I want to have, make a living, buy a house, have a family, progress as an adult, or do I stay in New York City and San Francisco as essentially the ward of the state?
All right. The thing that I'm immediately thinking about is there's an article by Friedrich Hayek called "The Intellectuals in Socialism."
Right.
And he points, he's asking the question, like, why is this intellectual class so inclined towards essentially a totalitarian social planner
and by the
ideology?
Way, also in Germany, which I can get into that quite a bit of detail.
But in some cases, in my reading of Hayek, who's probably the thinker I've read the most consistently, some of his framing around Germany was also to try to get at these ideas in an acceptable way.
Right.
Like even like the Road to Serfdom's focused on the Nazis, but it's really about the Soviets. He makes a very similar argument. He's like, you have an intellectual class that believes they're entitled to be treated like royalty, even though they don't produce very much value for others, which is why they don't make much money.
Right.
Like, say, all of academia, no offense.
No, I'm not an academic.
And
at least by training.
And so you're a professor, you resent all these like brutish businessmen that make more money than you, and you get wrapped up in utopian ideas, and next thing you know, you're advocating for the destruction of the society like every time. And I didn't really realize how much that pattern sort of tracks back through history.
And it has also implications like Frederick Spotts did a very good book called Hitler and the Power of the Aesthetic. And what Spotts did is he showed how strong Hitler's support was at the university level, in the architecture community, in the arts community, in the film community. One big advantage, get rid of all the gays and Jews. That's going to open up a lot of positions. You think about it today. If you're an academic and, no Zionists need apply, well, you know what? I don't think it's bragging to say a lot of people as Zionists are really smart and have a lot of talent. But you get rid of them. A lot of gay people have a lot of talent and are very creative. If you got rid of them,
they're great at gentrifying cities. Let me tell you.
Yes, for sure. So I think that there's I think that Hayek was onto something, and I think it shows in almost all the sociology. of the Soviet Union, and today in China, where it's become, again, very hierarchical, very sort of like the old Confucian system with a big exam.
Well, and even Mao's Guard, right? I mean, Mao's Guard were young people, and I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were the young, sort of college-educated crowd.
They were, well,
but maybe that's a little more complex there.
That's probably more modern. Modern. At that point, there were not as many people in college, but you had a generation that was coming up, a very big generation, because that was before their baby bust. Big generation coming up. I've interviewed former Red Guards, so I've sort of seen it firsthand. There was this generation coming up. They were very numerous, and there was a group of people who had been in positions of influence at least since the revolution. So the idea was get rid of those people. This is exactly what happened with Stalin in the Great Purges. There was all these young people who had been brought up under the Soviet system, but there were all these old Bolsheviks who were in control of everything. And Stalin said, "We'll get rid of them, and then you'll get a good job."
It's a very zero-sum view of the world, right? It's like to say, like, oh, in order for me to make progress, I need to take you out.
Right.
Like I'm climbing towards the top of some mountain, of which there's only one mountain, and there's only so many people at the top of it. I mean, and in some sense, that's certainly true in any given context. I'm thinking about, like, when I was working in TV, I was a creative director. I was like a high man on a very low rung of the entertainment totem pole. But if I think about it, there was probably only 100, 150 creative directors across all of television. So that's not that many people, not that many positions if you're in that particular
Right.
like vertical of like TV promos in the big networks. And it's not like that part of the industry is growing so much that if this is the path you took, there's all these options. It is kind of like you're waiting for people to age out or move so that you can step into their role. So there, at any given time, there's certainly a zero sum.
Well, it doesn't mean that new things can't happen. Like, there's some very positive new things, shows like this, podcasts in general. I mean, look, I don't have to like the podcast, but they're bringing something new in. I think that publications, some of whom I write for, the Unheard, Spiked. I think what Barry Weiss has done with Free Press is kind of miraculous. When I get up in the morning, I much rather read her person's account than what I would read in the New York Times, because her person isn't taking out certain factors. I mean,
Right.
I was thinking
The
of
lies of omission are just massive.
what I tell my kids in the class. I say, it's not the lies of commission, it's the lies of omission. In other words, they're not making stuff, like idiot Trump will say, oh, it's, the fake news. It's not fake news. It's the news that they don't report.
Some of it's fake news.
Some of it may be, but a lot of it is what they don't report.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking of that poor girl, Ukrainian girl in Charlotte, and
Yeah.
the mass media, most of the mainstream media, basically ignored the story.
Oh, yeah.
But see, the good thing is that now a independent, or what I do when I would cover things, I would be watching what was going on, let's say in Portland. I wasn't going to get it from the New York Times. I was going to get it from the Portland TV station, because I worked in TV. If there's a fire downtown or people shooting bullets, you're there.
Yeah.
And so you're going to cover it no matter what. So I could see the raw footage, or some of the things that happened in Los Angeles where, people were throwing, Molotov cocktails at Waymos and attacking people, not just ICE, but LAPD.
Yeah. Throwing bricks over the side of overpasses and cop cars.
Right. And the LA Times can choose to ignore it, but they can't stop the information. So there are some very good things in this. And hopefully we're in a sort of transitional period of some degree of confusion. But maybe at the end, we're not going to go back to, whatever NPR and the New York Times says is gospel.
I want to keep on the AI thread, which will lead us into the neo-feudalism pretty neatly. So you've got this environment What are your kids telling you? What are you experiencing of this generation that are in your classroom? Are they terrified? Are they excited? Is it all of the above? Like, what are you seeing in your students?
Most of them, I think, are very concerned and sort of confused, trying to figure out what this is. Some of the people, when I've had graduate students who are actually in jobs, they are directly affected. We have to understand that in the midst of, for instance, this is interesting. I was talking to the mayor, the chief economist of San Francisco, and I said, "Well, you guys are coming back a bit, isn't it? AI's companies." He said, "Everything we gain in AI, we lose more as the tech companies lay people off." Like Salesforce lays off thousands of people. Now, maybe Anthropic hires 200, and those 200 might be extremely well paid. But it's not like the thousands of people who worked in these companies before. So, I think that the effect is going to be, I think in the immediate term, the entry level group, and that's the students, they're the most vulnerable because a lot of the tasks that they do are at least theoretically doable by AI. And I'm actually on Monday we're doing a class. You can come film it. I have two people coming to talk about the impact of AI on the developing world. I have somebody from who's Indian, although he grew up in Zambia, and my researcher who's from South Africa. What's the impact? Historically, for instance, India really did well at the low end of the technology.
Yeah, call centers and stuff like that.
And a lot of things that are being replaced by AI. Again, not necessarily better, but if you're a company and you can use AI and you can save, 30% on something, okay, it's 10% worse than it was, but I'm ahead 20%.
If you think about the math here, so let's imagine that I'm a consumer products company. I hire a firm to do call center support for my product, and those humans, let's assume they're India. So, they're Indian. So let's say they're $5,000 a year per person to be your call center. Well, if you can replace them with something that's 80% of the job and it's only $500 a year as a subscription to a chat service, that's a 10x reduction in the cost.
Right. And you will accept a certain amount of inadequacy and a certain amount of incompetence and even a little bit of hallucination for those kind of savings.
I have a friend who's got who's a serial entrepreneur, and he's also an investor in companies like this. And he's shared with me that their online sales force is outcompeted by the AI bot to the tune of more than 2x.
Wow.
In terms of like conversion rate. So, I'm not sure exactly what the experience is
that's
like.
Scary.
But he's like, like the human conversion rate to a sale for this particular company is like 8 to 10%. And the AI bots is 18 to 20%.
Wow.
And in a way, some of that makes sense, right? You've got this thing that's just sort of a pattern recognition of all of human language. So it's going to be pretty good at being sycophantic,
right?
And telling you what you need and adapting to your subtle cues, and
right. And they'll know your history, and they'll know more and more of your history.
So, are you net negative or net positive on AI right now? And this is all going to change over time very quickly. But
I try not to be net negative or net positive as much as I think there are things to worry about. I don't think the most extreme cases, I don't think Skynet's going to be there in the next week or two.
But by 2027, maybe.
Maybe. But then who knows how I'll be here. But I think that there's I think there's a lot to worry about. And I think we are and by the way, before AI, in a very difficult transition, very parallel to the early years of the Industrial Revolution, when a lot of ways of life were overthrown. And by the way, not necessarily for the better. I mean, life as a weaver in a small British village where everybody knew each other and went to church together was living in the slums of Manchester an improvement? Probably not. But we are in that very in a very similar situation. Now, fortunately, the Industrial Revolution made us wealthy enough, so we're not like the people in Manchester. But I don't know where this goes in the long run. I think a lot of it is going to be having some sort of conscious idea of what kind of professions are ahead of us that could possibly help. What skills can I develop that a machine can't do? You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's going to be an area that we're going to have to look at. And one of the things I look at a lot in the new book I talk about is this the rise of the artisan economy. You know, it could be artisanal like this little show, or it could be artisanal like, you know, my friend Shaheen Saheki is creating what he calls anti-malls, where only independent businesses are in there. They don't allow any chains, and you're really buying the artisanal skill of the restaurant, of the of a clothing maker. You want a belt. Oh, here's the different types of belt. I'll make it for you right now. I think that's going to be part of the future. I think there's going to be a future in, you know, farmers markets have been going, you know, through the roof. I think people are looking for different kinds of experiences. I think the sameness and boredom that our culture has produces a counter, you know, some sort of a counterweight. I think that's part of the solution. It's not the whole solution, but it's part. And I think that there's going to be, if we reindustrialize, there'll be a lot of opportunities too.
I am reminded of a kind of saying that was like a slogan for one of my favorite people, Russ Roberts. I've had him on the show a couple times, but he and I are good friends. We made this Keynes versus Hayek rap battle together a decade ago. He's an economist, Chicago trained, taught at George Mason, has written about free trade forever. Big fan of Adam Smith. And he says of buy local. We tried buy local. It's called the Middle Ages. And I say that because not to, it's sort of derisive. But it has a different, I hear that differently right now as you're explaining this vision of the value of the physical and the real and the artisanal, because I totally agree with you about that. So it's like maybe the Middle Ages is coming back.
Well, I mean,
for the better. Well, it's like the Middle Ages 2.0.
That's right. Well, I think it's just that, you know, we went through a period where we technologically did mass production, let's say in food. It solved many, many problems. Yeah. You know, if you want to eat broccoli in Minnesota in January, it's got to be a certain kind of broccoli. It's got to be shipped right away. I know because I've worked with people in Salinas and the Central Valley. It's very much a something that that solved the problem. But on the other hand, you go to Europe. You go out to eat, the food tastes better.
Absolutely correct.
And
totally.
And and Italy in particular, because it has some of the best agriculture, it's just a different experience. It's just, and so I think more and more people are going to want that. I also think that there'll be some interesting developments of gardening. I think the population will disperse more into rural areas. One of the biggest changes that's taken place. The one that shocked both Wendell Cox and me, first time in 100 years, small towns are growing faster than big cities.
Right now?
Right now. We always thought the suburbs, exurbs would be the growth, and we were totally right. All of a sudden, we're starting to see cities of 100,000, of 200,000 attracting people. So I think there is some sort of idea of moving outside of these huge areas of concrete concentration and moving into something that's a little more integrated with nature, and in many cases is closer to agriculture. So, and by the way, it's not just happening in this country; it's happening in Europe, it's happening in Canada, and then the other factor is that these places are places where you can raise a family and where you might be able to buy a house, and those options don't exist in, I would say, your alpha cities.
I'm trying to think how there's so many places we can go together. This area of migration and movement in cities is where I've probably encountered your writings the most. And in a way, thinking about the city itself and the old feudalism 1.0. I mean, guide me a little bit. Where should we go next to get to neo-feudalism?
Well, I don't know if we want to get to neo-feudalism.
well, maybe not get there literally, but in our conversation.
Well, I would say,
what does the viewer that's coming to your thinking cold need to know in order to understand your concerns here?
Okay, maybe I'll give you a little thesis of what I'm working on now.
Please.
Okay, so my sense of it is that the political system can't fix what's wrong. That what's wrong is more profound than anything. You could have idiot Trump and then you'll have idiot Newsom, and they'll both be idiots, and they won't solve much of anything. We don't have a political system that generates much of a constructive alternative. And you just sort of, I consider Trump as sort of maybe a somewhat necessary enema, but that's about the best I could say about him.
I'm more positive on him than you, but he's got a lot of problems to be sure. So
I think that what we want to do is say, how do we make life better for people? And one of the big problems is during the industrial era and also during the early information age, concentration made a lot of sense. But, sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, from Disney, the technology created something that sort of killed its paradigm.
Just so I understand, the concentration made sense. What do you mean by concentration?
Okay, as certain industries where things were growing, whether it was in the culture field or in software, and even at one stage manufacturing that
like making cars in Detroit,
right? Doing even we still see it in Southern California. There's a kind of rocket scientist, aerospace engineer who is still very heavily in Southern California. So we still have pieces of that, but what's happening increasingly is because of technology, and now with AI, it's easier to duplicate things in different places. So, for instance, also what you have is you have a company in Long Beach developing low emission jets. They've got lots of orders, and about 200-300 people work in Long Beach, California, make a good living. 13,500 jobs in North Carolina is where they're going to end up. Anduril is doing a big expansion in Ohio. So what we're seeing
is that the military contractor. Am I remember?
Yeah, they're based in
Palmer Luckey.
Yeah. So so what you're seeing is that more and more industry is dispersing, and people are dispersing. Now, I do think that we're sort of moving into an era where there are sort of two different Americas of sort, and it's not ideology that's the main factor. There's a part of America where people say, I have to live in one of these few cities. I want to be in a place where, all the sort of woke ideas are still, fairly strong. I don't.
Why would you want that?
I don't. Well, because if I'm, this is particularly true, unfortunately, with women, they want to live in this environment, without, essentially with very little male interference. Let's put it that way.
Or very, very little testosterone. Let's say
that's for sure. And you're in a culture that's built around not about families and probably not about married people. I mean, married some, but a lot of people who either live together or single. I mean, the majority of households in Manhattan are single.
There's a graph in an NBC poll that was done recently that broke things down by male and female Harris voters versus male and female Trump voters, left to right. And in the top, and it was very personal choices. You're ranked 1 to 13, listed priorities. The number one priority for male Trump voters was having kids. Now, actually, female Trump voters, that was like number 6.
Right.
Harris voters, it was second to bottom.
Right.
Female.
Well, look, you think about it. You have a woman who, product of academia, definitely a DEI hire, and no.
Are you talking about Harris?
Yeah, and no kids. I mean, so and I think that so that's one America, and it's not insignificant. And then there's the other America where people are moving to places where they can have children, where going to church or synagogue doesn't make you a weirdo, where where the kids get a good education, where you could where it's usually somewhat affordable. And these are two Americas. And so I think what we're going to see in the next few decades, the power of the first America is actually going to be sustained by a very low birth rate, and by this group of women, and obviously somewhat consequently men who never have children, never get married.
It'll be sustained by that, or it'll die as a result?
It'll be sustained for a while until the areas where people have children overcome them. So, like for instance, if you look at the states where the people have the most kids, they're mostly in the South, in the Great Plains. That's where people have children, and that's where people get married. I mean, if you go, in the old days when I was growing up, middle class people lived in New York. Middle class families lived in Manhattan. My dentist lived in Manhattan.
Yeah,
friends of mine lived in Manhattan.
Even to this day, one thing, having lived in the city for a pretty long time, you can actually eat good street food in Manhattan for cheap.
Yes.
Even today, right now, you can go out, you can get a great slice of pizza, you can get a great sandwich at a cart for a couple bucks, even in 2025. So there's for people that only think of New York as like this political abstraction, they miss some of the texture of it for sure.
Oh, look, I mean, and we talk about cities, New York is the only city in the United States, as far as I'm concerned. Everything else is sort of on another plane.
You're a city chauvinist.
I chose not to stay there, but in terms of walking experience and food on the streets and culture, and there's just nothing. The only competitor is London, and those places I think will do okay in this transition because they have so much to offer to people and also, let's face it, a lot of upper middle class and wealthy people choose to live in New York, or at least live there for a while.
But you were saying there was a time when you didn't have to be in the 1% to live on the island of Manhattan like it is today.
And you certainly could be a upper middle class with a couple of kids. You could do that.
Yeah.
I think that's becoming harder and harder and harder to do and live in Manhattan. The demographics are pretty clear there.
I lived that myself. When my wife and I got married, when we were dating, we ended up living together, which my parents didn't approve of, and which frankly I wouldn't have done were not for living in New York City at the time. Because the stats on that are actually pretty bad. Like cohabitation isn't great for marriage success. But as soon as we got married and we're starting a family, it became clear that the only people that can live in Manhattan, and this was going back to 2004, so this is 20 years ago.
Right.
But even then it was like, oh, okay, so Manhattan is great if you're young and don't mind essentially living in squalor because you just sleep in your apartment and otherwise you're out and about. You're married with no kids, so you can both live in a tiny box, but you're out and about. Or you're ultra wealthy, making at least $500,000 a year 20 years ago.
Right.
And everything else, if you have kids, you better be making $1 million. Or you got to get the hell out. There's no chance.
Look, my family has been in New York since 1900. There was a time where almost every one of my relatives lived in New York. Today, I have one older cousin who lives in Manhattan, single, and my brother lives in Yorktown Heights in northern Westchester. Nobody's left. People who loved New York and didn't want to leave end up in Florida. They end up in Connecticut. They end up somewhere else.
Here in Austin.
Yep, Austin would be, if you're
Nashville.
So I think, in many ways, New York and to some extent some of the other big cities serve a function as almost like graduate schools for certain careers where it's really good to be there. But long term, I don't think that works. And I think it's a shame. And I think it's unfortunately sparked a cultural divide in the country where people who are married, have kids, maybe own a house, don't live in Manhattan, have a very different worldview than the people who live in Manhattan. The problem is the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal,
outside of the opinion section, for sure.
Opinion, they're the same people. They're the same attitudes. They went to the same colleges. They have the same beliefs. They don't even understand the rest of the country. The good news is because of the internet, Austin has a presence. Nashville has a presence. Dallas has a presence. Atlanta has a presence. And I think those are all positive things that have some sort of alternative voices.
So you were telling a kind of story of the value of concentration for a time. Like, a city, a place can come to have, you could say, like, from an economic perspective, it's like dense division of labor and specialization.
Right,
You want to get into fashion, you want to go to New York. Fashion, advertising, finance, news. There's all these things where it's like, you can have a real industry there. There's a lot of people to hire that are capable. There's a lot of firms, and that creates this virtuous cycle. And you can do it. You can build a thing. You can have specialties. You can have a lot of people.
Sure.
If I remember when I got out of school, one of my buddies was working in film in Philly, and the problem he ended up leaving Philly. He was working for the one really good high-end visual effects place, and they would hire from outside of Philly. And then when someone would leave, they would leave the city. Like, there was no local talent pool. And I don't think that firm survived as a result.
But I think what's happened is that now we have multiple poles. We have Dallas building, Y'all Street. A lot of the finance industry could very easily end up in places like Dallas. Aerospace used to be ours in Southern California. Now we have competitors in South Carolina. We have competitors in Texas, including here in Austin.
Yep.
So I think we're beginning to see the restore what America was like when Tocqueville traveled was, he said what amazed him was the decentralization, that there were so many points in America, so many places that each had their own ambition and their own culture, their own newspaper. Very different than France, where really Paris runs everything.
Yeah.
Or the UK today, where it's London. And, you take Southeast, as a MP said to me once, I used to work in London, he said, basically there's Southeast Britain and the rest is Russia. I mean, it's, places where as one sociologist said, the biggest business is the pub. And,
right. That's right.
I mean, there are huge parts of England, and I've been in some of them, and there were huge parts of the U.S. like that. What's beautiful and I think great about America is that places like Columbus, like Indianapolis, not just the Sun Belt cities, are starting to come back. Kansas City. And they're finding a kind of balance where they have enough of the urban stuff that you need to keep some of the younger people in particular and some of the sophistos, but you have a suburban alternative, let's say in Kansas City, Johnson County, where a middle-class family would feel very comfortable. And we're seeing an interesting change in where young people go to school. I was just talking to my boss, Ryan, at Civitas, and
Ryan Streeter.
Ryan Streeter. And, he was telling me that UT is getting all sorts of applications from the Northeast. They never got anything like that.
There's a recognition that you get all the value at a fraction of the cost of going to a place like Ole Miss or UT or Southern Sunbelt state schools that are selective versus Yale or Harvard or these sort of woke psychotic madrasas that these places have become.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think about, the fact that what my daughter had to go through at Sarah Lawrence. I never thought I would see anything like that. The degree of, anti-Semitism that we now, experience rather often. I think that what's happening is the students also, they're going to even the private schools that are in the South, because the faculty is not as crazy.
Yeah.
The board of trustees now,
Rice, Pepperdine, these kind of places.
right? I teach at Chapman.
Yeah.
We have a fairly conservative board. We have faculty is basically liberal, but they don't run everything. They don't. They don't. Believe me, I'm sure many of my faculty members would be happy if I didn't exist.
Like literally.
And I'm not. And I'm not. And I'm not particularly right wing, but I think that
no, but today you're a Nazi, Joel. Don't you understand? Haven't you seen the meme? Like you're if you don't subscribe, like the shifting Overton window of our politics is such that you are technically a fascist.
Well, this is I've written. I did my senior thesis at Berkeley on fascism, so I'm a bit interested in it. I mean, fundamentally, what is fascism? I mean, first of all, look, to me, Trump does give a sort of poor imitation of a Mussolini. I mean, he's not nearly as articulate or as intelligent. And so he has those mannerisms. But in reality,
you're just going to tick off the Trump fans in my audience every time. It's fine. It's fine. I criticize him all the time.
But in reality,
isn't there a part of you? Sorry to interrupt, but isn't there a part of you as a New Yorker that just kind of gets where he's coming from?
Oh, I get where he's coming. I remember one time we were watching one of the early debates, and my wife was watching. I said, this is like a bar argument in Queens.
There's a part of if I could just for a minute about Trump. Because when I was in college in the summers, I would spend every summer on the Jersey Shore, and in college I actually waited tables at Trump Marina. So I would occasionally see him walking past the casino floor, and his name loomed large in Atlantic City. He had all those casinos.
My mother used to go.
So there's a part of his brashness that I actually just fundamentally like, even if I don't think it's particularly statesmanly, and I would rather the president of the United States have better decorum. But I do like that he punches these people. Just the scope of what's been done to this man by the so-called elite institutions is so insane that how he's even still standing to me is kind of amazing.
Yeah, well, to me, the way I look at it from a historical point of view is we had the growth of this bizarre nomenclatura in the old Russian term, or apparat, a bureaucratic apparat connected to NGOs and the tech oligarchs. It was getting scary. And not that Trump consciously fights these things, but there were things that had to be gotten rid of. DEI had to be getting rid of. The subsidization of radical politics by universities had to stop at some point. It had to be at least challenged.
And there's so much more to be done on that front, from my perspective.
Well, and of course, not all that can be done by the federal government. And I don't know. I think what you have to do with education, if we want to get into that, is that we have to create alternative institutions like Civitas, like what they have in Florida and North Carolina.
Yeah, UATX here in town. Yeah, all the rest.
There's going to have to be.
Yeah,
because I don't think you could legitimately transform most of the most elite schools at all. I think it's just too far gone. There's nothing could be done about Columbia. When I was in high school, senior year, I took a class on Marxism with Mike Harrington at Columbia. The idea that Columbia would be a center of anti-Semitism and sort of bizarre, it was always a liberal school, but the bizarreness of Columbia today is beyond my comprehension.
The general alliance between the woke left and Islam is something I don't I know there's a history there. I know there's like a Soviet sort of Ottoman Arab leadership thing that's quite deep and historical, but it sure seems like just low resolution, like, oh, Jews are kind of white and rich, so they must be oppressors. Like, it's like super like Neanderthal.
And it's like, they don't know the history. And look, I've studied the history in detail, and I have a lot of, I think the Palestinians have a case to make, and I think at some point, some sort of accommodation is necessary. I'm not a Jabotinsky person, but
I don't know what that means.
Those are the people who feel that all of the land of Israel should be part of Israel. In other words, all the West Bank, all of Gaza. I don't think that's practical, but that's a big debate. But I do think that a lot of people have learned. One of the things that kills me is the lack of history. I teach a class on propaganda, and and the first week is, how did Christianity become the most important religion in the world? I said it's the most effective marketing campaign in history. And I said, why don't we find out why this happened and how it happened? And being, interested in Roman things, and he said, well, it happened in part because there was a Pax Romana, and Paul could go in a way that he couldn't have gone 100 years previously because there were too many pirates and they didn't have the roads. So I'm explaining, Paul, I think, is one of the 10 most important people in history. And here I am, the great-grandson of a Latvian rabbi, explaining who St. Paul is to Gentiles. I mean, that's kind of weird.
It's funny that you're mentioning that particular thing, which is because as I've gotten, in the past couple of years, I've gotten much more into my Catholic faith and trying to understand it. And so my YouTube feed is a mix of sort of oddball politics, AI and tech and Apple, and then Christian apologetics.
But you said particularly Catholic.
Yeah. And one of the things that is this interesting theological question is, if Christ is the Messiah, why did he come when he came? Because you could come at any time. Why would you come 2,000 years ago? And one of the arguments made by apologists is what you just said, that if you look at when would be the optimal time, it's not now. Because if you came now, it'd be like, oh, you're an AI create. There's no chance. If the Messiah is coming back, it's not now.
Right.
Because no one would believe it. It won't go anywhere. But right at that moment, you had Pax Romana, you had the Roman Empire, you had the ability for word to travel enough, and a whole bunch of other factors. But that was a big one.
And of course, the thing you have to remember about Paul was that he was Jewish, he was a Roman citizen, he was a Greek speaker.
Incredible.
That was the way that the Jewish tradition, which became Christianity, was transmitted, which melded with the Greek tradition naturally, given that you had it, created largely by Greek-speaking Jews.
And the early Christianity, as I understand it, especially Paul and those early church fathers, most of whom were Jewish, were grappling with whether Gentiles should adopt Jewish cultural practices if they're going to become Christians, since Christ was a Jew. Right. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff.
Yeah, and of course there were some things that probably wouldn't sell, like kosher. Too many people like their pigs. And
bacon is tasty.
And also, I'm not kosher. I mean, being kosher is a pain in the butt. And of course, you couldn't have circumcision because, asking a 20-year-old man to have a circumcision is a little different than getting circumcised when you're a week old.
This is true, although circumcision became very, my whole family circumcised, like myself included. I know that's getting a little weird to say, but
it's a father's show.
But actually this was, I know we're really off in the weeds now, but this was a debate in our home when my son was coming. And my wife and I are usually, we have a general strategy of getting aligned on things and having consensus together as a couple. And for the most part, it's pretty easy because we share values. We see the world in very similar ways. She did not want our son circumcised. And I said, I'm sorry, he's going to look like his old man. This is not up for debate. This is my area. This is my area. And I watched it done by the doctor. I didn't, but it was now people will say, I've brought this up once or twice, and there will be people in the comments who'll say, that is barbaric. How dare you? You've mutilated your child.
Well, I hardly think it's a serious mutilation, but you just got to do it when they're really young. But I think that the problem that we have now is that people don't ask the question. Now, what is encouraging, and I'm working on, is I do think more young people are beginning to say, maybe there's something other than this either woke or technoid worldview. That, waiting for Ray Kurzweil to upload my intelligence into the cloud. I don't know. Somehow that doesn't strike me as very exciting and not something I'm aspiring to. And I think that there's a real change. Now, I don't agree with either the left who say, oh, it's Christian nationalism, or the Christian nationalists who think it's some great movement. I think it's a gradual shift. I think a lot of young people are asking the question, isn't there something else? And I've seen it. I've seen it with my daughters. I think that's why the Charlie Kirk thing was so profound. I think if the Republicans,
profound to an extent that no one, even fans, I think, could fully. I don't think if you asked your typical right-wing activist that if something happened to Charlie Kirk, there would be protests of solidarity in the streets of Seoul, South Korea. Like, right. I don't think anybody would think that was
and
a
I
thing.
Think something is happening, and this is what I'm, one of the things I'm writing about, that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be organized religion, although often it is the need for community, the need for something other than the tech connection, or what Marx called the cash nexus, something else. Like I see it even in my, my own family. The synagogue has become a huge part of my wife's life. It's the community. It's part of something, we share together. My friends who were involved with the Catholic Church or with the evangelicals, my friends who are Muslims, they all have, this is something else, and something that isn't part of this relentless secularization driven by technology that I think humanity needs to survive. I don't, it doesn't have to be, acknowledging Christ. It doesn't have to be, we don't even want the rest of you to be Jews anyway. But
that's true. Yeah. I dated an Orthodox Jewish girl, and she was like, well, if you marry me, you're going to need to convert. And I went to visit a rabbi because I wasn't especially attached to my faith at the time. I mean, I was culturally, but it was like, oh, I'll check this out. And he's like, we don't want you.
Yeah.
We don't want you.
Yeah.
And I think they actually have to say that like 3 times.
Yes, they do. But unfortunately, my wife's Jewish, so I don't have to worry about it. But I think that this need for something else, and I think it's just beginning, and it's even beginning to happen in Europe, and in the stuff that I'm doing soon on this, I'm one of the great theses is religious people are just stupid. It's the dumb who are religious. The reality is, now I think that may have been true. You may have been able to make that case when Peter Berger and people like that were making the case that, education led to less religion. But we're now seeing that the most religious are actually better educated, more likely to be in a family, more likely to make a good living. And one of the things that I'm getting something this weekend on, which is in Africa, as Africa begins to evolve, it's not the primitive part of Africa that's Christian. It's the aspirant part of Africa that's Christian. The most exciting thing happening by far in Christianity is happening in Africa.
Yeah, that's been true for a while.
And so I have an African Christian working on that. So
that's really interesting. Okay, so you were laying out something that actually struck me as being pretty positive, that there's a reemergence of a more diverse, more expansive set of opportunities in cities and places in America.
Right, exactly.
Where you can live and have an interesting life.
Exactly.
And want to be where you are. Because I think, right, some of what caused places like New York and LA and San Francisco, in particular, DC, if you're into politics, to become magnets is because if you wanted to climb to the top of a tall mountain, those were the places you just felt like you had to go.
Right, exactly.
So that's pretty positive. That seems like a step in the right direction.
I think it's definitely a step. I mean, I remember when Mayor Bloomberg said, this is where you have to go to be successful. And I said I was doing a show and I said, I don't know. There's this place called Santa Clara Valley, and I think they've got more successful people than New York does. Jeff Bezos didn't feel he had to go to New York.
Seattle.
Elon Musk didn't go to New York. I mean, so this notion that I think there's more and more places you can do it. Now, part of it is the telecommunications technology allows you to do Zoom meetings and allows you to share information instantaneously. That changes. And I think the other big positive that I'm looking at is this reappraisal of what's important, what really matters. I mean, I think about it. I'm old enough to think about it now. What really matters? My wife and my kids, and my immediate family, and my brother. I mean, everything else is on another level. And
Yes.
people say you shouldn't be that way. Well, we're mammals. That's how we.
You shouldn't be that way. Which yardstick are you using for that should? I think it might be Satan. I'm just going to say that.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but what I would say is
just materialist, selfish narcissism. Like, what's the should? Where? No, I'm being serious for a minute. Where do you, when someone says that you shouldn't prioritize your family, what yardstick is that should coming from? Because it does. I don't understand. It's hard for me to steelman that.
Well, it has its origins. It certainly in both Bolshevik or Marxist-Leninist, as opposed Marx is a little different, but Marxist-Leninist thought, I think it's a big trend. You go back to Engels writing on the family; it's pretty devastating. And even in National Socialist Germany, loyalty to the party and the Führer was more important than loyalty to your family. And I think that the only way society works is if we take care of particularly our neighbors, but particularly our families. And what I fear is that, and I think this is happening very much in Europe as well, even more so, people are saying, I'm not going to have a family. It's the state that's going to take care of me.
Yeah, good luck.
I mean, if you ever read the Life of Julia.
Oh, yes, I remember this.
This really showed you.
Yeah, lay out what this was for people that didn't see it when it came out.
First of all, there's, Julia, she appears, out of nowhere. There's no family background. She has a child, but there's no man involved. So I tried to figure out, how did this happen? Maybe it was immaculate conception. And then the child disappears. There's no thing about the impact of the child, the relationship of the child to the mother. It's only how much government help she got at each step of the way.
Yeah. This was an Obama era piece of digital propaganda about how wonderful the government is in enabling this selfish narcissist to live her truth.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's
completely atomized with no connection to anything that human beings care about.
So, after writing Neo-Feudalism, I said, as a kind of last gasp, I'm going to say, here's how I think of a better future it can be built. And it's not political, predominantly. I have a huge emphasis on local governance. I did a project and a paper on it. I visited heavily Latino working class cities south of Los Angeles. They were so well run relative to the city of LA. You would drive along, terrible roads, parks are falling apart, graffiti. You go into these cities, all of a sudden it's gone. So I asked the councilman, I said, how come it's like this? They said, because I live here and these people are my people. If I go to the coffee shop and the graffiti hasn't gone down, they blame me personally. You could take the entire LA City Council, walk them down the street of any city, nobody would know who they were.
Well, not only that, so let's talk about cities and in the modern, like right now, because the thing I like to say, which really is very, very much like you, I think, is that we have essentially Hunger Games governance in our deep blue cities.
Yes.
That it is The city council, I mean, Austin is guilty of this.
Well, you have that DA.
We got nut jobs in our city council.
I mean, I think Kirk is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, he's like a normal old Texan that's like a Democrat that today would be called a Republican, but he's still
sort of a Bob Lanier type.
Yeah, I mean, like Rick. I've gotten to know Rick Perry a little bit. He's like he used to be a they all used to be Democrats here, and and again, it's like that Colin Wright. The left keeps shifting, and the center moves so that you're now a right winger, and so is everybody else. But you have this thing where you have these large cities like Los Angeles or New York. New York's going through this with the Mamdani craziness. The people that are at the center in governance, they live essentially a cloistered 1% protected life in guarded neighborhoods. They have no notion of what it's like to be a working class person and take public transit. They only do it for a photo op. Their kids are all in these elite schools.
Right.
I mean, it's the Hunger Games. And then they have luxury beliefs, like your fellow Manhattan Institute friend, Rob Henderson.
Well, he writes about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like they're governing on the basis of horse. Like, oh, I'm a city, but I'm going to prioritize climate change. It's like, even if you're right about climate change, which you're not, cities can't do anything about climate change, bro. What are you doing? Fix the potholes. Help the homeless get some help.
Make sure that you have a reliable, affordable electrical system. How you generate it, that's a decision at a higher level. You certainly could do a huge amount between natural gas and
nuclear, which they all ban. So it's like they're all so. How do you understand the emergence of Hunger Games governance in all of these cities? Well, because it's crazy.
Because the 1% group you're talking about is, first of all, a lot of it's inherited, particularly, cities like New York, San Francisco, I think has the highest percentage of people who are with inherited wealth. LA has some. Basically, the two parts of the crazy coalition, if you will, the public employee unions, they've become absolutely, and they were not founded as being really radical organizations. Actually, oddly enough, they've become big anti-Zionists. They were all founded by Jews, almost all of them. And so you have the teachers' unions, the public employee unions, who are organized. And in Los Angeles, they run the city. That's it. There's no question. That's the machine. They've got the people to come out in the field. And now that I think a lot of them were divided whether to support Cuomo, which was the old corruption as opposed to the new corruption. Now they've gone for the new corruption. So you got that. And then you've got this group that we started talking about in the beginning. You've got these people who've gone through the woke colleges, have all the luxury beliefs, very often are from upper middle class families, make not enough money to live decently in New York, and that's Mamdani's base.
I've heard a concept that I imagine you've encountered more than I have, because I've only gotten it kind of indirectly, that wokeism. I have a book in my office I haven't yet read. I think the title of which is "We've Never Been Woke."
Oh yeah, that's a good book.
Yeah, so I haven't read that book
yet. And it's written by a left winger, so it's.
And so important. I think his thesis, as I've heard it summarized, and there's other folks here, is that really what's going on is a battle between essentially the people you talked about earlier, this sort of middle elite that are aspiring to be the commanding heights of the culture.
Right.
And they're just one-upping each other. And it has nothing to do with anything but selfish pursuit of the next rung up that social status ladder.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's and that
they don't care about the poor. They don't care about people of color. That's all bullshit. They just are like, how can I look better so I can get my Goldman Sachs job?
Right. And of course, and look, it's like, people always talk, all the race stuff, and I say, well, how does DEI helping upper middle class black kids get into Harvard, how does that solve the problems of the South Bronx? I don't seem, I think that the problem is poverty, and that should be addressed. It's very complicated. I'm not about to say how you do it, but the issue is class. Like when at Chapman, one of the professors got very upset because we got rid of DEI, and I said, this is a good move. We should be focusing on working class kids who maybe are the first. We make a big deal at Chapman about the first generation to go to college, which was in my family. My father was the first, um, and I think that we really have to focus on the class issues. I think this is one of the great things I think Texas has done, which is have admissions at a certain level for all the schools in the state. And let's face it, the kid who's coming out of some working class Rio Grande community might not have gotten in on his grades, but if he was in a fancy suburb of Houston, but I think the focus on class and the focus on opportunity is where we should be at completely. And this idea that because we now have a big enough ethnic upper middle class that you could supply those schools with enough Black and Hispanic kids forever.
Well, that is what they are, right? So Claudine Gay, the discredited plagiarist monster that tried to destroy Roland Fryer's
she's still
career.
making more money than probably the two of us combined.
Oh, she definitely is. So for those who don't remember, she was among the 3 women at the congressional hearing from Penn, Harvard, and I think Columbia, if I'm remembering correctly. It might have been I think it was Penn, Harvard, and I think Columbia. Basically, like, what are you doing with this? What's happening on your campuses in 2023? She's just a silver spoon kid. She's not DEI. She's a upper middle class person who acted like she's part of some social justice movement, but she's got more in common with people that make way more money than me and my family than anyone that she claims that she's part of the movement of. It's just all for show.
And of course, a lot of times you'll find, I see this with Latinos, it'll end up being somebody from Central America or South America, more likely, who's from the upper classes themselves, who end up speaking for particular groups. I mean, there's definitely, what's going to be really interesting to see is when does the woke people run into the real class warriors, and how does that break down? And that's going to be fascinating to watch, because if you're Mamdani, what your working class constituency that you think you have is very different than what your wokeists want. What are you going to do when they close down the charter schools? Who do you think goes to the charter schools in New York? They're African American and Latino kids.
So I had Bill de Blasio on the show, and I got to know him in real life because we both sort of participated in this high school debate league as judges, and we're actually releasing a short film. Actually, it's going to be long, but a series of films about this and about high school debate, and he's part of it. I actually like Bill, like interpersonally. I disagree with him on just about everything in politics. He's just come out endorsing Mamdani.
Of course.
And it's like, what do you do? What do you do? Like, you do realize that if you make the buses free, it will be filled with people who are using it as temporary housing, harassing the actual working class people that need to take it to work.
Right.
And everyone that takes the bus to get to work knows that. So I don't think you care about those people, because you do know, I have to assume these people know that their policies are corrupt and horrible because they're putting them forward. So I get to assume that they know their outcomes. That's the way I like to think about it. You're not just ignorant. There's something else going on.
Right.
I mean, maybe you are ignorant, but I'm not going to give you that benefit that you're just ignorant.
Right.
Oh yeah, giving away buses for free won't turn into housing for nut jobs that want to stab women.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that they have a very, there's really going to be interesting to see how he deals with those issues. You close down that, or and what I don't understand is the community grocery stores. his base among South Asians is filled with people with little grocery stores.
Well, there was one other thing I was remembering that why I brought up Bill de Blasio. The two other sources of his ire that I know about. One was the Success Academy schools in New York,
Right.
who are that are like these high standards. The woman that runs it is this firebrand, but they're like great schools. They're like the KIP of New York.
Yeah, and there's also I've written about the Catholic, associated charter schools too.
And then the Doe Fund, which was this program that I featured in a documentary I did with Arthur Brooks, that you've probably seen these guys. They're like wearing the blue jumpers. They're often off the street or out of prison. And this thing helps these guys by getting clean and sober. It requires something of them. Okay, we will give you a job. You will clean the street. You'll get your act together. You got to stay clean. And it's an incredible program. And of course, that got attacked also by Bill de Blasio.
Why?
It was I don't know, because it's like they were asking them to have standards. They were not just taking every demented bum off the street. It's like they couldn't let in actual deranged people. They had to like the desire to always go for the people who actually probably deserve to be in prison and treat them like a victim when they've murdered people. It seems like the thing that makes the left utterly crazy to me.
Yes, I absolutely, and particularly what I find bizarre is women who are clearly most exposed. And we know we've seen circumstances in Europe quite often, and they happen here too. Who's vulnerable? Elderly. My brother and I both pretty strong guys, and but 20 years ago I didn't worry too much. Because we're not a good target. I'm 72 years old. I'm kind of a target.
Yeah.
So you start to feel that kind of, and the fact that you talk about people who, want to reduce the number of police, there's domestic abuse. I was talking to a guy at the gym who's a cop, and he's talking about domestic abuse. And he says, the cops say it's the most dangerous situation. You got some lunatic guy with a gun who's just beaten his wife, and you're going to go and you're going to send a social worker. I mean, that's
and the social workers. Like, it's not just a full employment program for communists that are getting out of these universities.
That's exactly what it is. And
that's what it is.
And the problem that Mamdani is going to have is, it's one thing to be a lunatic in, Madison or Austin or Ann Arbor. You can kind of get away with it because there's a lot of homogeneity, and there's a certain tolerance, and people have to be in these places because they're state capitals and they have the major university, but that doesn't work in a big city like New York, filled with new and recent immigrants with a well-developed multi-generational underclass. You're really going to try that there? I mean, it was one of the most remarkable things in my lifetime. When I was in the 1970s, I would go into the city, I went all the time, and it was scary. And you started looking behind all the time. During that Giuliani and Bloomberg era, with particularly, with a really good policing, Bratton.
Yeah.
It was like a whole new experience. Like, you didn't even think about it as being a problem. You got on the subway at 34th Street and you went down to Greenwich Village. You didn't think twice that was a problem.
No, I mean, I moved to the city in 1999. I was the beneficiary of all of that.
Right.
And I considered going to NYU in 96 when I graduated high school. And even in 96, when we went to visit NYU, and I was, coming out of Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I was like, I don't know, like Washington Square Park, it was a little dirt. Like I was not comfortable. Even 4 years later in the progress. This is an interesting question about that moment and whether we can get back to that. It seems like, tell me if this is true. It seems like you had the 1960s. and this radical new left with the peaceniks and Vietnam and the I mean, the civil rights movement, some of which is obviously, I think, very good, right? Sort of breaking down things that needed to be broken down, especially state laws. Like people seem to forget that this was state laws. It was government. It wasn't like, but you have the civil rights movement, you have cities burning, you have this emergence of this left-wing radicalism, the postmodern weirdos and all that stuff. And then it seems like 2 decades, 70s and 80s. Really, it's the 70s, actually. The 70s is horrendous.
Yes.
Right? Utterly horrendous. Stagflation, the end of hope for the country.
Deindustrialization.
There's the New York Post, like, go to hell, New York, or like, because New York needs a bailout. And President Ford is like, nah, I'm not doing that. And what comes next is something that seems impossible today. You have like a Republican prosecutor that comes in as mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
And at the time when he was the mayor when I first moved to New York City, and he was popular. And then even before 9/11, after 9/11, he was like the America's mayor and all this stuff. But it seems like we sit here 25 years later, and the most likely incoming mayor is a communist.
Yes. Well, that's a loaded term. Certainly a Marxist and
wants to seize the means of production.
Right.
He says it.
Right.
Could we get back to a world where there's like a law and order Republican that's the mayor of New York City? Are we in the new 60s right now still? Or are we in the 70s now? Where are we?
It depends on a lot of things. If there's if the rest of the country does reasonably well and New York lags, I think there'll be more of if there's a general deterioration, then Mamdani may say, hey, look, I've got the formula for the country. It's just these evil Republicans in Washington are making it impossible for us to have, these things. I don't know. I mean, the problem, and we deal with this in Los Angeles as well. Like, how did Rick Caruso lose to Karen Bass, given that anybody who goes to L.A. knows how much it's declined? I love Los Angeles. It is heartbreaking to go into that city.
Karen Bass, also a fan of Cuba, and part of essentially communist revolutionary trips to Cuba. So
exactly. So here's Rick Caruso, successful developer, spends, God knows how many millions of dollars, he gets beaten, and not close. I mean, she really beat him. And she's going to run for re-election after the fires, after they clearly screwed up, and she'll be re-elected easily, because she says, well, I'm running against Trump and I'm running against ICE. And you sit there saying, also I wonder what the opinion in South Los Angeles African-American communities are about ICE. It would be very interesting to know. Because, I just think that this political machine is in such power, and you don't have the sociological base. See, when Giuliani ran, when Reardon ran, when Bob Lanier ran, you had a lot of middle-class people of all races living in the city. And they had a very different view. You've lost those middle-class families.
Okay.
So now you
just have the woke elite zombies.
And people work for the government, people dependent on the government. And then you've got this elite class that somehow, stands around and watches this all happen.
I heard, with regard to that battle between, you said Caruso?
Yeah.
Yeah, Caruso and Bass, that this was a firsthand account from a witnesser to this focus group in Los Angeles ahead of that election. They were asking about all the policies and everything, and the two candidates were abstracted. I think I'm telling this kind of stylistically correct. It might not be exactly right. And the whole room, which was almost entirely, well, it was a mixed group, I think, but the room was basically on board with the program of Caruso. And as soon as they were told that the opponent, whose views and policies they all opposed, was a black woman, all the white people in the room were like, well, we got to vote for the black woman. Like, it was like a total race guilt. Like, he watched this happen in the room, and there was like, so wait, you're going to prioritize this person's skin deep identity over the success of your city because of social signaling pressure? Like, what?
I know. And, you're talking about a city now that's maybe about 8% black. Used to be 15. I mean,
it's getting more left as it gets less diverse.
Right. And it's getting more left because people now choose. I mean, in a sense, I mean, I'm not an example of anything, but, someone like me, I would have voted for Rick for mayor. I live in Orange County. My synagogue is filled with moderate Democrats who all left. Filled with it. Rick would have gotten 2/3 of their votes. Giuliani.
Yeah.
That was his base. And Cuomo tried to sort of keep it going, black middle class, cops and firemen.
Yeah. Or Eric Adams, for that matter.
Right. Or, well, I think one of the great tragedies is if Adams had not been so corrupt, he would have won easily.
How corrupt is Adams really? Or is the corruption really like, is this like, I remember we hear about President Warren G. Harding, like, right. Oh, he was so corrupt because of was it Teapot Dome?
Yeah.
And then you look at what that actually was and you're like, this was the great corruption scandal that took down Warren G. Harding?
Well, he had, apparently had a lot of bad associations and people around him that weren't very good. And for whatever reason, he's kind of a strange guy. And, but
Adams?
Yeah, but I think Adams basically could, in part because of Tisch as the police commissioner, he's made some real progress. I think Adams, would have won. I think this Mamdani thing is a combination of some changes that have taken place and just sort of a bad situation, because he's going to get 42% of the vote, maybe 40. And a lot of it is going to be because people say, I can't vote for Cuomo and I can't vote for Adams, so they don't show up.
I mean, Cuomo is the fact that Cuomo is even trying to make a comeback after his behavior during COVID is absolutely like, I know we're a comeback country. I know like we've got pretty good laws on like bankruptcy. We're a comeback country, but some people shouldn't come back. Like killing grandparents in nursing homes with bad COVID policy that was obvious from the start. Yeah, you should be gone. You should be exiled. Right?
No. Look, I mean, I think, and also a lot of the criminal reforms he passed. So he has no real case. I don't know, but the problem is we're getting to a point that in big cities like New York, Los Angeles, it's impossible to run as a moderate. I'm not talking about a conservative. I'm talking about a moderate, a middle of the road, an Ed Koch.
Right.
I don't think you can run as an Ed Koch in New York anymore. There aren't enough voters to do that. Adams had the advantage. He won the black vote. The black vote's still significant in New York. Very high turnout, particularly black women.
Well, especially as somebody who is tough on crime, but for working class and poor black people who know that they need the cops in their neighborhood.
Right. And also
as opposed to the woke lefties that think they don't because they don't live there.
And somebody who said this uncontrolled immigration was killing the city. He said that.
He did, which was pretty shocking to hear if you weren't paying close attention.
But, I mean, how can you have whole hotels filled with undocumented aliens, mostly men, some
military age men, largely.
Yeah.
The whole thing's been like the whole Biden era migration's been all military age men, basically.
And what you're going to get, you get a bunch of men, young men, they got, I still can remember that kind of sentiment. You get a bunch of, men. And of course, it's even worse in Europe where you have a lot of particularly, Muslim men from very conservative cultures, all of a sudden exposed to, German women with miniskirts. Well, you're going to have an issue there.
Conservative it's not wrong to call those conservative cultures exactly, but I think to an American ear, let's say very traditional.
Traditional and with a very bifurcated view of men and women.
Yeah.
Baked
into the cake of the theology.
Right. I mean, it's, Whereas, Christian theology, Jewish theology has certainly opened up to women. You have many female pastors, many, the conservative and reform rabbis increasingly are female. I'm not necessarily sure it's all great, but
Yeah, I'm super Catholic on that stuff.
but you open up, the role of women has been greatly increased. But and it's not just Islam itself, but the form of Islam that's adopted, which is a particularly puritanical form. That's not great. And my wife always says to me, she says, we walk on the beach and we see the Muslim men in flip flops and Hawaiian shirt and all that, and the poor woman is in a burqa. How fair is that? It's 90 degrees outside. I mean, you just and yet this alliance of the left and the Islamists is a pretty in Europe.
Yeah.
It's close to a majority.
All 5 major cities in London have, I think, Muslim mayors.
That's right. And if you're,
in London, I'm in England.
Yeah, and if you go in London, it's very nerve-wracking to be Jewish in London today. I think it's
to be a woman or to be like a teenage woman
or be a
teenage girl, I guess,
a flag-waving Britisher.
No, you're Nazi if you fly the British flag.
I mean, and that's one of the things I find you can't build a culture by destroying the past culture.
Well, this is part of this this year zero utopianism. That right. So
yeah, go back to the French Revolution. Yeah,
and so it's funny. Your book has this picture from the French Revolution on it, right? This is the 3 estates,
right?
What is this image?
One is the aristocracy. One is the priest, and they're riding on the middle class.
So
the third estate, as they would say.
So I think the thing that is so difficult to navigate now and try to think about in a rich way is all the different forces cutting in these directions. Because we have a new, you could call the woke, the sort of the new clergy.
Right.
Like
clerisy.
The secular clerisy or the clerisy. You have this managerial elite in these Hunger Games economies who are the sort of new nobles.
Right.
And then you have the rest of us.
Right.
And yesterday, I was revisiting this 2021 Pew Research study that was done about the 9 different, it clustered politics into 9 tribes.
Right.
You remember this thing?
Yes.
Did you think this was pretty good work
I thought it was interesting, yeah.
So one of the things that is really interesting to me about this is there was a bunch. It's hard to process. I'm still processing it, and I don't know that I've got a good processing of it. But one of the ones that's so interesting on the right is the second largest, or one of the largest clusters they call the populist right. And this is very much at the center of, I think, MAGA.
Yes.
And the populist right, you had on the right, you had the sort of Christian traditionalists, this largely older people, very Christian, not Christian nationalists, but actually do want Christianity to play an important role in our society. Then you have the sort of establishment right, which is more like
libertarian. Maybe.
Libertarians would fit into this to some extent, but also like neocons and National Review types.
Right.
And older, like Reagan Republicans who are not as religious necessarily, but are, free markets, free trade, all that stuff. And then you have the populist right. Now, the populist right was super interesting to me because this is before Trump's return. This was 2021. This is even early into the most extreme versions of the woke reign of terror of the Biden years. Their economics are actually kind of left.
Yes.
They're anti-corporate.
Yes.
They're protectionist, which cuts in a bunch of different directions. They think the economic system is rigged.
Yes.
And are open to more regulation.
Yes.
And I want to talk about this group because I feel like it, and in some of the other stuff I've seen, you sound a lot like them.
I have, again, I have no fixed ideology. I try to look at each issue as best I can.
But even in this telling, the notion of feudalism here,
Yes,
this is very much the populist right, the MAGA right, and I have a lot of sympathies for this view.
I have sympathy with.
They're
them.
like, get off our back,
right? And that's why people move. That's why people, if they want to have a family, they're going to go someplace else. You take a look at California, where if you're a young person and you're making a decent living and you're paying 40, with the federal taxes, you're paying 40, 50% of your income. You're never going to save money for anything.
No.
And then, you have, and so what you have is, I think you have I think there is this populist group. I mean, it's unfortunate that it gets lost in the sort of Trumpian, bravado and crap that he does. But it's a big constituency. And what's amazing to me is the political class missed it entirely on both sides. And Trump figured it out.
And a book that left a big impact on me was Charles Murray's Coming Apart.
Oh, yeah.
And it felt like the earliest example of like pointing towards this. And it rhymes a lot with your writing. Basically his thesis was you have these super zip codes that have this urban cognitive elite class that are this luxury belief weirdo people that look and sound kind of like me, but believe in whack job shit.
Right.
And then you have the rest of us. But I am part of that elite. I am. I live in the super zips. He calls out our zip codes around here as being one of the super zips. So I've lived in the super zip code land. And we all watch the TV shows and we all sort of, we're talking about HBO at work, that kind of thing. And then you have everybody else. And everybody else is living an entirely different life. And among the things that are different about it is family breakdown is way more extreme.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more stuff that is like actually like tragic and pathological. And it's where you also see the family breakdown that leads to addiction, these sort of cyclical traps where it's like, okay, you're in this horrible area. You don't have a father. You don't have really even a good mentor in your community to help.
And all your teachers are female. If you're a boy, you have no contact with male role models.
So you don't know how to direct your energy, your male vitality into something that's actually going to like set you up to succeed and find a spouse or a mate that's like healthy. So there's all that stuff going on. And those are just, and there is a class thing there where, we can, it's easy to be like high mind and be like, oh, Trump's bravado and he's so brutish. Yeah, but you know what? Like, we're a brutish country. We're a brutish country. We're loud and obnoxious. And we wear jeans. That's what we are. That's what we are. We're not the British.
And you know what?
We say like, go fuck yourself. That's what we do in America.
I mean, I would have liked to have had somebody who delivered that message without the incoherence and off the top, crazy tweets and all that. But, again, I come back to, we were headed in a direction, something had to be done. And even my very liberal friends will say, Trump was necessary. Somebody had to get rid of DEI. Somebody had to get rid of the censorship by the tech platforms. Somebody had to start moving our technology into defense. I mean, there were things that he did or has done which were totally necessary. He did it sometimes in a very brutal way. I don't think.
Why do you think that? Give me an example of it.
Well, I just think
I'm not going to like interrogate every instance of this, but that's a strong claim.
Well, firing everybody in the department instead of saying who actually works well and who doesn't work well. I don't think that would be a good practice. I think some of the ideas of, well, if you say this, you can't teach. There's been this little bit of this sort of censorship, pro-censorship in the right, which
there's an element of that for sure.
And I think that's something. And also one of the things I detest about Trump, and I will say this openly, he has a total inability to slap down people who are completely irresponsible, and Tucker Carlson should be, basically exiled into the cornfield. How he is able, with his absolutely sick worldview. And I can tell you, I was on a show twice. One time I just walked out because he was such an asshole. Because
Really?
yeah, I think he's an anti-Semite. I think he's anybody who thinks that Russia is some great example of how we should be living. I think he's Lindbergh without a plane. And he's
Okay.
I mean, there can be no tolerance, period, for that. And I feel the same way about people like Curtis Yarvin. How is someone like that with neo-monarchist, clearly, openly racist views and very much, taking people by their intelligence and say we should only have these kind of people. I don't, I just think that there's that angry, ugly aspect of the right which I can't endorse. I was brought up with very strong values about race, about everybody should be treated equally. And if you read Yarvin's stuff, it's scary.
I haven't spent much time with
Take a
Yarvin,
look.
like at all, actually.
I did a piece in Unheard on about eugenics and the rise of eugenics on the right, and to the left too, but mostly on the right. It's very scary stuff.
Well, this can kind of shade into the tech talk a little bit. So my exposure to this is indirect. There's only so many things I can try to keep track of, and I don't find I'm still fundamentally a classical liberal in my orientation.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I don't remember when this video came out, but there was a Big Think video early in the days of Jordan Peterson. It might have been 2017. In which he said, at that point, in that context, the right in America, especially post-war, had developed, some of it through very specific people and leaders like William F. Buckley.
Right.
A sense of the Overton window for the right.
Yeah.
And excluded from that were race identitarians, so the David Duke types.
Right.
And maybe less fairly, but understandably, the more conspiratorial, grand types like the John Birch Society.
Right.
And I don't mean to even smear the John Birch Society, because I think there's plenty of people that were in that kind of, that were looking at things and had something useful to say. But
you're more tolerant than I am.
I mean, there's a lot of, I'm not an expert in that. Maybe sure. I would read all the body of it and be horrified.
Yeah, I think you probably would.
But basically there was here is what we are. Here's what American conservatism is, rooted in our Constitution, rooted in our founding principles, which are classical liberal in nature.
Yes, and I agree. And the progressives are a break from that, which is I just published something on that today.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this because it comes back to these weird roots that we've got in even our language of left and right. So you have this right that's actually not really right in the way that the European right was.
Yeah, it doesn't have the sort of imposition of religion, or you're not French if you don't have this heritage, that kind of thing.
And as an Italian American, that my whole family came here in the 1920s, and during that giant wave of, that's actually the beginning of backlash. The 1924 immigration restrictions was was the biggest at the time restriction on immigration. I think that's where they imposed the quotas, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
So you have a right wing in America through until recently that has some boundaries that I think are reasonable.
Yes.
And an Overton window that's healthy for the country as I understand it. And what Jordan was saying at the time, and I think this is very much still true and it's getting worse, is the left didn't have that.
Yes.
Included in the left were sort of Clintonian, like today would be like Clinton in the 90s, today would be a Republican.
Yeah, and I was a only political job. I worked for the Progressive Policy Institute, Democratic Leadership Council. So
DLC. So the DLC was like the post-fall of the wall. I want to ask you about that, but this is part of this. So, and I know sometimes I monologue on the show. I apologize,
That's
people.
okay.
But the left didn't have that. So you got like Mercusa and the campus radicals and the whack jobs and the lunatics and the literal communists. Angela Davis, like a terrorist that gets celebrated, even like recently at UT, like celebrated. She's a terrorist.
Well, how about
She's a commie terrorist.
How about Mangione? Your fellow Italian.
I know, like mass movements. Some of that's even on the right too, because again, the populists don't like the companies. And he's like, what are we going to do about this? Like, what happened? So how do you understand that? So you're agreeing, but how do you understand that dynamic on the left and right?
Well, there has to be, you have to have something where you say, look, we're not saying you can't speak. You can go speak. Frankly, the two-party system is sort of breaking down, because what Democrats are doing is you're having to accept, as you're saying, all this crap. So, I stopped voting for Democratic candidates locally because I knew that they would vote the way the teachers' unions told them to vote. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a process that's going on where the crazies on the left, they call the groups, have almost veto power over everything. So, Mamdani is going to try to shut down or limit the charter schools. He has to because the teachers' union orders it.
And in this case, I think he agrees.
I agree. Yeah.
Even though he went to a $70,000 private high school.
Right.
What an
I know. But then on the right, there were some restrictions. I mean, I have friends who worked for President Bush. President Bush would never put up with that kind of, somebody who's openly racist or, in favor of eugenics. The right seems to now be allowing these people. Not only are they part of the discussion, they're close advisors, including, and very.
Give me an example of that. Who's a close advisor?
Yarvin is a close advisor to J.D. Vance.
Really?
And J.D. Vance is close with Tucker Carlson. I know J.D. Vance personally, and we had a little break because he, when he decided to be a Trumpist, I said, "Hey, J.D., you're letting your ambition destroy your thinking. You're so desperate to be up there that you're going to go along with this guy." But he did. But he's influenced more by these very, very what reactionary is the only word. Whereas I would say Buckley, who I also met, Buckley was a conservative. He wasn't a reactionary. He didn't want a radical change. He wanted to slow the change and then move towards a more conservative way. But he was not a radical. I don't think William Buckley was a radical. I think he was radical.
No, he was conservative, as in the role of the conservative is to stand atop the changes of history and yell stop.
Right, exactly. And I think and that's totally legitimate. But
I actually think, as we stand here now, that is just about the only healthy thing you can say.
Yeah.
Like, what is the change that we want that's good right now? I'm curious. Like, do you think there's any progressive change that's worth anything?
I think
today,
all the good changes, almost all of them, are from the grassroots up, not from the government down. So, for instance, some of the things with the charter schools is very good stuff that's going on. Some of the groups you're talking about, where they're taking these young men. There's lots of really good things that church groups are doing, that neighborhood groups are doing, I think that's where the changes are going to come from. They're not going to come from the top because there is no political consensus in this country, so you can't come to any kind of programmatic agreement. And in the digital age, you don't need central control of things. Like when I work with a small town in South LA, and they have the same graffiti program that the city of LA does. You send an email to a number, and they say, here's a graffiti here, there, and there, and you send it to the city. The only difference is in these cities, it gets taken care of the next day. In LA, it could stay there for eons. So,
billions spent on every one of these things in cities like LA to not do the job that they claim they're doing. It's the sheer waste, the sheer graft is so shocking.
And the problem with LA now, we have 4 of 15 city council members are DSA. So you already had left wing,
not as in Dad Saves America, Democratic Socialists of America.
And so what you have is you had a large group of fairly liberal Democrats with a bunch of far left socialists. And the fights in the big cities today are between socialists and moderate liberals, or even fairly liberals.
Who get called fascists now.
Right. I mean, it is just astounding.
So you were part of the Democratic Leadership Council.
Well, I was
even at some level, but you were.
Well, it was called the Progressive Policy Institute. It was the think tank associated. It's the only political job I've ever had, because I do believe in many of the fundamental ideas of traditional democratic liberalism. I think they've been completely destroyed.
What are those ideals?
Equality in front of the law, against all, against government-approved segregation. Okay, building the infrastructure, making the country more competitive, promotion of sciences. These are all good things. Theoretically, they've been perverted so badly. And the understanding that what we want to do is improve the market system, not destroy it, because the market system has created the greatest amount of wealth for more people. And the other thing is incentives for work. And if you read Pat Brown or Franklin Roosevelt or many of these people, Hubert Humphrey, that was the ideology. That ideology opened the door for this other ideology, and it as an ideology barely exists. Probably if it exists, it exists in what's left of the left wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, there's what you're describing, and that moment in time, as I understand it, is the era of neoliberalism.
Yes.
Which is, help me round this out if I'm missing something.
Sure.
But as I understand it, you have this moment where I think that some of the writing starts in the 80s of basically an acknowledgement that communism, socialism doesn't work.
Right.
That markets work for a whole host of reasons that are fundamental to the nature of information and reality in humans.
Right, exactly.
Like it can't be, it's not good in theory. Like socialism doesn't work in theory. It doesn't have an information transmission system. It's central planning nonsense. It can't work. Only in heaven, only with the replicator could you maybe not need money and prices. So with that recognition, you then have essentially Clintonian politics. Free trade, deregulation, open markets, competition, a welfare state, but one that has to not disincentivize being productive and creating value for other people.
And look, do I feel that we were optimistic in certain areas where we were wrong? Certainly on free trade, I think nobody understood the challenge of, Peru and Mexico is nothing compared to what China is. I think we were unaware, and also we didn't understand that our political system would be subsumed by politics that helped the Chinese, because Wall Street benefited from it, the tech companies benefited from it, the United States of America. The people of the United States of America didn't benefit that much, but certain very wealthy people made a fortune.
Why do you think that? I know that's easy. That's an easy story.
Right.
That's a story that's I think that is very commonly held, that is the case. But it does exist in tension with people's desire to have their basic needs be more affordable, which is what free trade did enable.
It did for a while, and then it became, what's happened, of course, in the case of China is they've moved further and further up this chain. So it's one thing to get cheap dolls. It's another thing to get cars. It's another thing to get your computers. It's another thing to buy your software. It's another thing to buy your airplanes. As you move up, then what's left for the United States? Mark Zuckerberg in the metaverse, I mean, I even think of it from a national security point of view, and I spend a lot of time with those amazing young men, in particularly in El Segundo and in Long Beach, and you know, we're not remotely ready to deal with China, because China,
Yeah.
it's not the Soviet Union, it's not Togo with gas stations, it's you know, it's a sophisticated, great civilization with a sense of itself, with a very different mentality, which is, we're not going to solve our problem by importing poor people from the rest of the world. We might hire some people on a temporary basis from Africa to harvest the crops. That's about it. But the fact of the matter is, we have not been prepared for this. I think that both conservatives and neoliberals were very naive about what China was trying to achieve. And we're paying the price for it now.
I mean, Donald Trump, quite singularly, in a lot of ways, brought this to the foreground, even if in practice it's pretty mixed, because he talks tough on China, but then turns around
and cuts the deal.
But he's like, 600,000 students. We want those students. It's like, do we want those? I'm not. Do we?
No, I thought Gallagher wrote a very good piece in the Journal saying,
aren't they? How many of them are spies? You don't need that many of the 600,000 to be spies for it to be real bad, right? I don't know.
I'm working on a couple of pieces about the penetration of American institutions and Australian and Canadian and UK institutions, because I write for the Anglosphere generally, they own candidates, they contribute to political campaigns.
There's this is it Confucian centers? Is that what? These
institutes, and then you have Qatar. Qatar finances Mamdani's mother's movies. Are we? Is this computing? As opposed to Russiagate, which
which was entirely
right. Trump is a moron for being saying nice things about Putin, who's an awful human being, and you should not say anything particularly nice about him. But the reality is, what's happening with the Chinese and the Qataris in the universities. We have. I've already written one piece about this, about how the California climate people are just completely tools of the Chinese. What the California climate people want to do is, we don't need to build anything here. We'll buy all the solar panels and the cars from China. So what are Americans going to do for a living? How is the country going to finance itself if everything we do is made in another country? And we were at the point where we didn't even have the capacity to make iPhones because we didn't make the right screws.
Oh, I remember this. When we're sitting here in Texas, in Austin, and the Mac Pro, which was a very low volume Macintosh, but the highest end. I like this kind of computer, but almost nobody needs it. And they were like, we're going to make the Mac Pro in the U.S. And it was among the things that they couldn't get was screws that were very particular.
And that's where, I think Trump's ideas, I don't think he has any idea of how to make these things happen, but there definitely has to be, and it's probably, here's my thesis. Trump's policies and the ones he have will actually have good long-term effects, but they will take too long to do him or J.D. Vance any good. Because, you think of all these,
that could be true.
All these plants that are being built, but they're not going to be employing people except for construction workers for the next 2 to 3 years. But I think.
But when he gets reelected in 2020, 2028.
My fear is
happen. That's not going to happen.
It's going to be very interesting if a person from the left gets elected, and then what are you going to do? You're going to stop the construction of these factories. Now, Biden screwed up a lot of stuff because he had this idea as well, but he put all these conditions on who could work there, and all the DEI stuff. I was looking at something in Arizona, and they said, we don't have 2,000 people who are qualified to work in the semiconductor plant. We're going to have to bring people from Taiwan. Well, Taiwanese who know how to make semiconductors, I think we can take as many of them as we can get away with.
It's very hard to figure out how to navigate those issues at the intersection of national security, given what we are as a country, and the benefits of free trade, and which is division of labor and specialization, but I mean that's exactly kind of we were talking earlier about concentration,
Right.
and about cities and what they bring. That this is another example of that. So you have now 30 plus years of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in China and Taiwan developing a robust ecosystem of human skills
Right.
to do this kind of very particular manufacturing. And we don't have that. And you don't just do that overnight,
No.
especially in a world where we're paying people to study gender nonsense.
Right. Well, when I go and visit these companies, they're trying to leapfrog the Chinese technology. A lot of it using artificial intelligence, machine learning, to make that happen. I mean, again, I think as the great parallel or hopeful parallel is from Arthur Herman's book about Freedom's Forge, where the Germans were clearly ahead technologically, and how U.S. industry, with the right incentives, was able to outproduce and out-innovate the Germans.
Yeah.
I mean,
Really amazing.
Yes, the Germans had the first jet fighters and the first rockets, but they couldn't come to scale enough, and we just pulverized them with volume and with very good products in terms of particularly an aircraft. So I think
are we that America today?
that's going to be the big question. That's going to be the big question.
I mean, when you think about, you put yourself in 1938,
right?
and what is the American stock? Like, who are we here? And what is, we're in America where the very left FDR believes in work.
Yes.
And understands that to get the Social Security Act passed, you have to promise that it's not a dole.
Right.
And basically hide the fact that it's a Ponzi scheme through all these layers of obfuscation about accounts that don't really exist and this and that, because the culture of the society is like work, not a dole.
Well, I pay into it. In my case, my Social Security is a lot less than I put into it, but that's another story. But
right from day one, that act is passed and people start getting checks, and it's like, where did this come from? I didn't pay into this. It's a Ponzi scheme. That was my grandfather.
Right.
But my point being, like, that's a different group of people. That's a different culture.
Well, and of course, when you read Arthur Herman's book, you get a lot of them were farm kids who had learned how to work on machinery. I mean, obviously, we're not going back to that. What I think will probably help,
like, will the TikTok generation be able to get into the building nuclear subs and that?
It's going to be the Hispanic working class kids who have tactile skills, whose fathers worked in construction. That's going to be a part of it, and it's going to be these kids, who are coming from Eastern Europe and from all those tech. They have a tremendous amount of tech. A lot of them are from the former Soviet Union, where technical education was much stronger. If you go even to our engineering school at Chapman, it's already 20% Hispanic, 40% women. I think that I still think there's possibilities there. I have been very, very impressed with the fact that there's a bunch of young tech people who are saying, "I want to build stuff." What good, frankly, if Mark Zuckerberg was never born, would the world be worse? I'm trying to figure out why that would be the case.
That's a macabre way to put it.
I mean,
he's weird and kind of a robot, but is he a demon? I'm not sure.
No, I'm not saying he's a demon. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not. I don't think. I think these people do things.
Is he a force of evil? I mean, maybe he is a force of evil.
I just think that what we've had is we've elevated somebody whose world vision is, oh yeah, you'll have your AI companion, and obviously you have the AI girlfriend or the AI nurse doctor, or I'm going to go in the metaverse where I can be a gladiator in ancient Rome and I can spend 3 hours doing that. I don't think that's very productive for the society.
Okay, this brings us to the neo-feudalism. What is it? What is neo-feudalism, and do you still feel like we're in danger of it?
I think we're further along on it than when I wrote the book.
So what is it? Lay it out.
Okay, one, it's a tremendous amount of wealth concentrated in very few hands by control of certain industries which have taken on oligopolies. Like, if you look at percentage of search, it changes here and there. Operating systems. I mean, you're down to about, outside of the Chinese alternatives, you got about 7 or 8 companies that are pretty dominant with financial results. And the dangers there are not just what these companies do, it's the amount of money they have in their nonprofits, and particularly when you get the widows or ex-wives of these people who have $40 billion.
So like Lauren Paul Jobs or this Chan Zuckerberg Forward, these sorts of things.
And they have unlimited money. They can do anything they want. They can give money to, you look at, I think the Gates Foundation gives money to groups that are basically saying that STEM is racist. And, as my president, Chapman, who's Italian, who's now—
Why not just burn it? Just burn it. That would be better.
He's now learning Arabic because he says, I really want to get into the history of mathematics, and I have to learn Arabic because most of our mathematics come after the Greeks. It was the Arabs. So tell me why that's racist. Oh, by the way, and they got their stuff from the Indians. So, this sort of insane stuff that these, and I'm convinced a lot of them never read a book of history. The original Silicon Valley guys who I was able to interview, including Bob Noyce, a lot of them read history. Don Valentine, who was one of the lead investors in Apple, was a history buff. And we would talk about history. They knew what had happened in the past. I think these geeks know, to use a Yiddish word, bupkis. They know nothing. If you took the top 10 CEOs and asked them a question about the Constitution, they couldn't answer it. I would be shocked if they actually knew anything about American institutions, about American political history. And of course, many of them were not brought up here, and they were educated and brought up abroad, and then educated in American universities who are dedicated to the destruction of America.
Name names on this. Who are we talking about? There's not that many of them. We can name them.
All right. I mean, it's clear, and I Bezos, I know, extremely brilliant guy. They each have different characteristics. I mean, Bezos. But they all have the same. They want to control every industry that they can possibly control. I mean, that's, whether it's entertainment or health. So you have Bezos. Bezos is, sort of trying to be sort of modern Gilded Age, with a $500 million yacht and his well-constructed girlfriend or wife, I should say. Elon is obviously a nut. Brilliant, but a nut. And even
is that a fair way to put it?
When we say everybody who's ever worked for him says the same thing. So
what does it mean? Why is he a nut?
Having 13 children from different women, taking certain drugs that I mean, but maybe that's geniuses were always like that, always a little weird.
Yeah.
And he's certainly a genius. Bezos is a genius, but Musk is a genius on a different level. The guys running Google and Apple, they're just operant, high-end operant.
What does that mean?
Otherwise, they're bureaucrats who rose to the system. Now,
what about Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the founders of Google? How do you think about them?
They're guys with a brilliant idea, but don't be evil has now become very evil. So,
as I understand it, one of the motivating forces behind the creation of OpenAI by Elon and I think Sam Altman was, I think Elon had conversations with, I think it's Larry Page, in which Page was basically saying to favor the continuation of humanity was speciesism, and that we should bring about a AI, like the robots should replace us, and it's okay if they replace us.
Well, I hadn't heard that one, but
so and this was one.
Kurzweil is sort of in that direction.
Speciesism. That why there's a kind of like it's all Asperger's spectrum behavior. It strikes me as.
But
Anyway, keep going.
But that's so if you go through the list, they have a certain ideology. I think Elon, because he's a founder and because he builds things, he's different than the rest of them.
He's kind of a founder,
right? Well, SpaceX is pretty much.
Did he found SpaceX?
It pretty much is.
Because he didn't found Tesla.
Right. But anyway, they're his companies.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's. I'm not trying to take away from him, but there is this little bit of like other stuff going on.
But I think that these are people who, I think Jonathan Sachs, a former rabbi for the UK, he said they're engineers. They look at the world in a very sort of here are measurable results, and we do this, that happens. The other parts of human existence, I don't think they really get, and they don't quite understand that what they're doing. Let's say, and I don't know if they care or they don't care. Having 8-year-old kids on cell phones is really a bad idea. I mean, I can tell you, even at the college level. Now, my partner doesn't let me do this, but I do it in my own classes. I say first day, no phones, no computers. And they said, well, how do I take notes? Well, these things called pens and paper. Not only do we know that they retain much more that way.
They do, yeah. But
one time I had a guest lecture. It was on a real estate class, and I had a guy who was a developer in Dubai, and he was giving a presentation. So we were in theater seating, so it was like this. And so I went to the top of the stairs, and they all had their computers, and I realized that they were not taking notes. They were, sending messages. They were playing games. I won't tolerate that. And the fact that the universities tolerate that is criminal in my.
It points to something that my friend Brian Kaplan has pointed out in his book, The Case Against Education, which is that it's really weird for you to buy a service that's very expensive. Like a class at a university can be $3,000 to $5,000. That class as a share of the total of the year can be like a $5,000 purchase. And that the students are excited if the class gets canceled. Like if the professor doesn't show up, or if they get an email saying, oh, the professor's sick, class is canceled today. Like, if I am paying $5,000 for something and I'm told I'm not going to get it, I'm pissed.
But you see,
that's not
they want the stamp at the end. That's all that fundamentally matters.
The sheepskin effect.
Right. That's really what the big interest is. Now, some kids aren't like that, but when I went to Berkeley, we would have 7 or 8, books per class. I now am down to 2 or 3, and I don't think most of them read them. I think they do AI, and they say this book says this, but they don't actually sit down and read the book, so they don't really get the subtleties and
the time you're just spending with the thinking, with the material. It is hard to. I have personally been impacted by all this stuff. I haven't even I don't even know why I've had this open. I haven't even used it. You, in another conversation, you said that you had interactions. You had interactions with Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
as part of
just one brief.
I'm a huge fan of Jobs, and whenever I bring this up, people in the audience are like, he's a terrible person. What's wrong with you?
Well, he struck me as an arrogant ass, to be frank.
Like there was a lot about him,
but he was brilliant.
Obviously. He was brilliant. He was Well, yeah. What you drew a contrast between Jobs and this new era of tech founders.
Well, I mean, I think you almost have 3 eras. You have the founders of the digital age, Trey Big, Jobs, the early semiconductor guys,
Hewlett and Packard,
Noyce, those people. They were the founders, and they created this new thing. After them came the era, what I would call the MBA era, when essentially most of the tech money went into, selling stuff, social media. And that was where the original VCs that I interviewed tended to be engineers themselves, the next group were MBAs. Harvard MBAs probably have destroyed more companies than any group in history. But and the guy I do the AI classes in Harvard MBA, so I always give him crap about that. But
rightly so.
Right. So you had that group, and that was where it was a lot of consolidation. It was generally offshore, virtually everything. Nothing got.
Which time frame are you?
This is really
The early 2000s?
Early 2000s would be probably, when you really started seeing the commercialization of the internet.
Yeah, post.com bust where out goes pets.com, but hey, eBay, Amazon, these are real, and off we go.
Right. So and now what I'm thinking is there may be a third wave, which will probably be less oriented to just software, but more into building things, space related, medical related, and things where you're using technology to actually solve problems as opposed to distract people, which is what we've been doing. And that's these young, and not just young, but people certainly young by my standards, but people in their 30s and 40s who are starting these new companies building things. And they have a very different mentality. And I think if they have a hero, it's Elon Musk.
How do you think about Peter Thiel?
Well, I've had lunch with Peter. I think he's a little ideologically out there and, sort of, I don't see a great human vision there particularly. And I guess now he's into this thing about Satan or
the Antichrist.
He's
doing like a four-part lecture series on the Antichrist.
Yeah,
Tim Dillon had a good.
Yeah, I
had a good bit on this on Rogan. He's like, so I'm into like military contracting and mass surveillance technologies, and I'm really into the Antichrist. It's like, it's a little interesting.
You sound a little like the Antichrist.
Did you see the Ross Dohat interview with Peter?
No.
You really got to watch that.
Yeah.
Ross asks him, do you want humanity to continue? And Peter stammers on it and saying yes. And Ross points out, like, this shouldn't be a hard one. And he continues to. I've met Peter a couple times. I don't know him well or anything. He's interesting and scary, but also like orthogonal in ways that are hard because he criticizes a lot of this culture that you're talking about in the Valley. He's the one that said, laid out this idea that we have this stagnation where all the energy in tech and Silicon Valley was dedicated. He's like, we wanted flying cars and instead we got 140 characters talking about Twitter. So he is a complex character. There's a lot of people on both sides, left and right, that think him and his companies are forces of darkness.
Well, I think that obviously having capacity to defend the country is probably not necessarily bad. I just find a lot of them to be just lacking humanity. There's a gene somehow. Maybe they got an extra gene and they lost the gene along the way. The sense of humanity is just not there.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by humanity?
Like, how do regular people live? Why do we have children? Why do we? I mean, if you think you're not sure about humanity and you want to have robots, like, I don't know, that doesn't seem very appealing to me. I mean, the whole idea of being a human being, in large part, is having a family, passing on your traditions to the next generation. I'm very happy that my girls have taken up the tradition next, and my younger is much more religious than I am. And I think that to break everything down into technology. I'll tell you, I did a show. I don't think it ever hit the air, but Katzenberg and Spielberg were doing a show on the future. So I was there with Kurzweil and a bunch of other techies, and I was like out there by myself. Like, Kurzweil.
You're like, why the hell did you have me show up?
Well, and it turned out I was the only one who said, well, I don't think information technology is the solution to many problems. And I had just come back from India, and Kurzweil said, well, I was in Dharavi, and it's pretty awful there.
I've been to Dharavi, actually.
It's the biggest slum in the world.
Mm-hmm. It's the backdrop for the movie Slumdog Millionaire.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I spent a week in there for my documentary with Arthur Brooks. So
yeah, so I was saying, oh well, but they have information technology, and I'm saying, yeah, but they have a terrible diet. They don't live very long. They have, all sorts of tremendous problems, and the fact that they can look at a Facebook video doesn't seem to be really the solution to their fundamental problems. And I felt that there was this sort of wanting to replace humans as much as humanly possible. And then this notion of essentially melding people with machines. And by the way, they may be right. When I'm writing all this stuff, I may be prophetic about bad stuff. It's not what I want. But I think it's happening. And I think the technoids, both the progressive technoids and the conservative technoids, aren't all that different on those issues.
yeah, look, in some ways, having this conversation in an honest way is weird and hard in that, so this show, I'll be radically transparent for the viewer. This show, and I talk about this sometimes, but this show is a product of a nonprofit I founded.
Right.
And that's what we do. That's why we don't have sponsors. I actually think the advertising model and the sponsor model creates some pathologies. I want to be able to have a conversation that might not get 1 million views. And so I have sponsors in the form of like-minded people that I go and say, hey, here's what we want to do. Will you support us? And there's a lot of money in tech. There's a lot of people that I would love, maybe would benefit from being able to go and say, hey, would you support our work? And at the same time, I'm with you that there's peril. There's peril in these technologies. There's peril in the impact on our kids, on our families. My wife and I we adopted a teenager from South America. And we are facing this totally different set of challenges around screen time management, because it's hard to do in general, but it's easy with your own young kid because you can just turn it all the fuck off.
Right.
But we brought someone into our home, and he's a great kid, and it's going great. But he's old enough to be like, well, I know what I'm doing. We're trying not to be too restrictive, but at the same time, he doesn't really know what he's doing. And the internet is like a dark, horrendous place filled with exploiters. And I open up the privacy settings on Facebook, and I want to put Mark Zuckerberg in prison.
Yeah.
I want to protect my adoptive son from creeps. And I open up the dashboard back, and it's this has more obviously obfuscating complexity meant to keep me from protecting my kid.
Right.
Than architecture software.
Right.
My home architecture software is less complicated than the back end of the privacy settings of Facebook.
Right.
And that just makes me filled with rage and feel like these are not good actors in our society.
Definitely.
But then that's also not fair, because at the same time, nobody has to use Facebook. And these are voluntary private enterprises, although the involvement of the CIA in a lot of this makes that also not entirely true. But I believe in free enterprise. I believe in innovation. And so I'm very conflicted about all of this.
Well, you should be, because like a lot of the tech stuff, it's making, it is some tremendous advantages. The fact that you can stream something that ran a week ago and you didn't have to schedule yourself around an event.
Even more human. My biological son, my oldest, his best friend moved to London when he was in 3rd grade.
Right.
He is still friends with him.
Right.
And he's still friends with him because they for the past however many years it's been, over a decade now, He gets on Discord, they turn on their things, and they play Magic, or they play Fortnite, or they play League of Legends, and they're talking. And it's like, that's the same technology being used for tremendous good. These kids are still close friends.
So the question, and this is what I'm working on now, is it's, again, I keep going back, it's molecular. It's at the very bottom, who we are, not just the technology. If we're crappy people with crappy values and we have powerful technology, that's really bad. And the question is, how do we create an environment where people, feel that they don't need to escape all the time, where they have real understanding of human beings. I mean, I think a lot of what's happening, for instance, with people beginning to go back to church, is just to have access to other people. I mean, there's a, and I think if we have a totally secularized society with a huge percentage of population that's not married, doesn't have kids, and then they embrace this technology, it's going to be very toxic.
It's a Brave New World. It's some horrible chimera of 1984 in a Brave New World.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I taught a whole class on Brave New World, so and I think in many ways it's the most prophetic. And if we get to where he goes and where some of the technoids are going, which is to essentially create, change the gene pool, where they had the vats, where we just create people to fit whatever needs we have. I don't know. I mean, it's there's a lot of that, and a lot of his writing about class, the writing about the sort of happy surveillance. Brave New 1984 was sort of Stalinism.
Yeah.
I would say there's a little more California in Brave New World.
Early in our conversation, or maybe it was even before we started rolling, we were talking a little bit about cultures and family and warmth, and I've been thinking about something that I'm ill-equipped to have strong views on, because it's just like I have a stylized sense of it. I don't have the history. I'm not a historian. I'm like a do-it-yourself intellectual. So I'm full of shit half the time, probably.
Well, a lot of the historians are.
Fair enough. You go look at academia and it's like, well, if that's what it takes to be an academic, then I'm doing all right. I have a strong affinity for my ethnic heritage as an Italian American. Right. I increasingly don't even like to say Italian American, because I love this country and I am just an American. I am an American of Italian descent. And it really, it was my great-grandparents that came here. It wasn't even my parents or my grandparents. It was my great-grandparents. I'm an American. When I think about the South, as in southern Italy, my gene pool left there.
Right.
Wanting to build a better life.
Right.
That's a self-selecting group that have a certain amount of risk tolerance, ambition, desire to improve their lot, and that succeeds. That continues.
Right.
I think Arthur Brooks calls it ambitious riffraff. We're a country of ambitious riffraff.
Right.
But the southernness is interesting, because a friend of mine that runs the Bruno Leone Institute in Milan.
Oh, yeah.
Free market economist Alberto Mingardi. He talks about why is Southern Italy like a backwater economically? Because it is. Italy is only.
I was in Naples last year.
Yeah, we were talking about it. Italy's. I love it, but you go to the south and you see these incredible old towns that are mostly abandoned. You eat incredible food, incredible warmth, but its economic engine is entirely in the north. Those are more Germanic people,
right?
But it's cold. There's a different ethos of the north,
right?
But they're literally also colder.
Right.
And what it seems like might be true, and I'm curious how you understand this, and with your view on demography and migration, I feel like you've probably got really awesome stuff on this. It seems like America as a land of opportunity, as a frontiers country, as a place for grit and building things. In its fundamental DNA is a Northern Anglo country, as in like the people that did that and the reasons they had the fortitude to do it was because they weren't Sicilians that had a comfortable life in warm climate. They were English who had
Scandinavian.
They were Nordic, they were Northern, and that gave this country a character and an engine, the Protestant work ethic engine.
Right.
But that has pathologies in it. And and I think that the humanity that you and I have been kind of talking about is kind of Southern. The family at the center. Alberto says the reason why the Southern Italians never really managed to build an economic engine is because the family is so central in Southern Italy that you don't trust anyone outside your family.
Right.
So building a firm is really hard because you only trust your cousins.
Right.
And that survives even into my family, like in a certain sense. Like you get that even in like these pockets. It's like you only really trust your cousins. You only really believe something if your aunt says it.
Right, sure.
How do you think about those dynamics? Is there any truth in that the northern southern cultural forces? How do you think about that?
Okay, that's a very interesting thesis. One, I think we have to show our respect to particularly the Anglo-Saxons for having created this particular form of both economic and political culture. I don't think we would want to have the Spanish political culture, okay?
No, and the only other diverse New World country is Brazil in terms of multicultural, and it sucks. So we like the Brits. You wanted to be a British colony historically,
right? And you know, and obviously in many ways Australia and Canada,
and Hong Kong
and Singapore. So I think we have to say that this underlay of Anglo-Saxon mentality and values is absolutely at the core. If you got rid of that, then we're just a bunch of different ethnic groups out, you know, to kill each other. I mean, it's really not useful. But that Anglo-Saxon, what makes America a great country as opposed to England, which is no longer a great country, as sad as it is to say.
No, it's falling.
Yeah, and it's, you know, is that because we keep allowing certain groups to come in who add something different to the mix. So you have Hindus coming from India with entrepreneurial values, with strong academic and intellectual strengths. You have, you know, Chinese are very entrepreneurial and also you know, strong family culture. That makes us a stronger culture.
Well, even before that, I know these are European, but the first waves that were not Anglo were the Germans, right? And then the Irish.
And the Germans.
I mean, I guess the Irish are Anglo, but it's different. It's still very different, Catholic, different thing.
And the Germans helped, you know, when you look at the industrial growth of America, there's Germans and Scandinavians put a huge role. And then, you know, we've gotten the, you know, influence from Mexico and from other countries. So, but you need to have this fundamental Anglo core, which is open to every other ethnic group. That, you know, the WASP control of America has pretty much passed. It's you know, it's now, and even among the Anglo-Saxons, a lot of them come from the South. A lot of them come from, you know, not privileged backgrounds. So I think that this fundamental Anglo-Saxon sense of fairness and structure and order and reform is at the core of our success. And to dismiss it as something horrible, racist,
white supremacy, and
I mean, and look, I'm not British and I'm not a Christian, but I still admire what the British have done and what Christianity does for the country. You know, because without it, you know, we'll start to look like what's happening in Europe, which is basically nihilism.
It's deep waters that I feel far less capable of having a strong sense of, with like because like with history and this kind of history, you can very quickly have like a just so story.
Right.
Like you a narrative fallacy. You can kind of tell it the way you want. So it's very interesting to me. And I think, you brought up these forces that you feel like are dark among Trump and Vance, like Curtis Yarvin, and these more like this notion of a heritage American, whatever that means. And this like this sort of pro-white
Right,
thing.
which is something not unexpected given the demonization of the white population and of men in general. You're going to get a reaction. You can't keep telling people that they're a bunch of idiots without them saying, "To hell with you."
Well, and this is the thing this is why the discourse there is so toxic, because it's like that it is a totally expected reaction.
Right.
If you're going to turn all of the major institutions for an extended period of time, then maybe this is coming to an end, but I think that it's not clear that that's permanent. The end of woke.
Oh, I think it's deeply embedded.
It's deeply embedded in the institutions. It's deeply embedded in academia is just a cesspool of this stuff. And it's like, well, no, we were born in 1619 and we are, and the British are the worst of the whites. And this hatred of the very thing that I think objectively as a non-Anglo is like the greatest pearl of human progress the world has ever seen. Like
right.
Western civilization is this path that sure looks like Christendom giving rise to like a notion of the rights of man that is not by virtue of status, which comes straight out of St. Paul.
Right.
To the kind of radical levelers of the 1600s and the Magna Carta, through to these the radical British, like I had Gordon Wood on the show, like famous historian. He's like, the British were seen as radical in their belief of individual liberty in Europe. And then the early Americans.
And not to mention, the disestablishment of the Catholic Church.
Right. So you have, even as a Catholic, I think the Catholic Church is pretty good, but you still have this like break from authority and this notion of freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And that's what births America. That's the Puritans. That's who these people are. It's William Penn, the first, as a Philadelphian. It's like you've got Pennsylvania, William Penn's Pennsylvania, the Quakers, Ben Franklin. If you're not proud of that, you're a monster. That's how I'm sorry. Like if you're not
Mark Twain, or
like if you don't see that trajectory,
right?
Like we're not. Then you like. I like my gut takes me to places where I'm like, get the hell out of here if you don't like that. If you don't like that, and then you're so ignorant that you're just like, go live elsewhere.
Yeah.
See what it's like.
Well, I think that the transgender students who are supporting Hamas at Sarah Lawrence should take a trip to Gaza and see how long they last. You don't
even need to go to Gaza. Go to Jordan.
Yeah.
Go to Egypt. There was. Did you see this stuff? There was footage of all these folks, and I know the Gaza thing's complicated.
Yeah,
there's a lot of human tragedy. I'm very inclined towards Israel not being the demon that the left makes it out to be on this, but it's also complicated, and I don't have all the facts. But it was. Did you see the footage of the? They were trying to get in to do humanitarian aid, maybe noble, maybe that's good. Maybe they're good-hearted people, but they went through Egypt and they're filming themselves like, the Egyptians are beating us up and they stole our passports and we're just trying to help these people and the Egyptians are horrible. And it's like, you do realize the Egyptians have a border with Gaza and they didn't let any of these people out, right? Like at a minimum, it's complicated, right?
Right, because, I've traveled a bit in the Middle East and, if you're Egypt, or do you want 2 million people who are politically radicalized, or even if they have 50,000 Hamas supporters, you really want that in Egypt? They've got enough problems. Jordan had a whole civil war over this. Lebanon was destroyed by this. So they're not stupid. They understand that, and look, I don't know what the solution is in Gaza, but the demonization of Israel and this, and now is very openly anti-Semitic now. I mean, no Zionist can walk into the library at the school, or that kind of thing. They don't care if even if I'm by Israeli standards to the left, I'm still a Jew. And so I think that and the left has just gotten, they're so insane on these issues, and my daughter, I think she's really right. She says there's first they may have been really interested in Black Lives Matter, then it was COVID, then it was transgender, now it's Israel, and next week it will be something else. And they get whipped up into this enthusiasm. And at the very far, not most of them, but the very, very far extreme, some alienated lunatic is taking in all this stuff and getting a gun. And that's, now I think the same.
Over and over again.
Right. And what I'm saying to the people on the left is, you don't want to go there, because if it got down into street battles, you would get your ass kicked, because where do you think the former military and the cops and the former cops are? And the guys who've been out hunting since they were 8 years old.
Yeah, there is this ironic cosplay. It's radical cosplay. And they must know that, do you really want to go up against, like, the right, really? Do you really think you're going to win that battle? I mean, like, you got no shot.
Right. In Weimar, Germany, at least the communist military had all these guys who had been in the World War I, so they had some military background. Who do you think? Who's an Antifa? A bunch of weirdo, children of suburban parents. I don't, you know who these people are, but they're certainly not. They're not people who were served in the military or police people. And it's like, why are you? I mean, I'm actually quite frightened that if this left wing violence continues, there will be a reaction on the right, and it will be much scarier, because they've got their act much more together on the military side.
I'm less worried in the sense, fundamentally, that I think that at the core, I think the further to conservative you get, the more you're dealing with a lot of Christians.
Yeah.
And but then again, who knows? I have confirmation bias there. I see myself as being somebody on the right. So of course I want the people that are closer to me to be the more moral people who have better grounding. I'm very worried in these times about confirmation bias.
Yes.
Because for myself. And I mean for everybody, but when I'm trying to think, like, doing this job, trying to be a communicator, trying to have conversations like this, it's real easy to just say buzzwords.
Well, and I think that the hard part, I think, in this whole polarized environment, is how people get their news. And we were talking about that in class the other day, that nobody has a newspaper subscription. Okay. When you read a newspaper, particularly in the physical form, you see all sorts of stuff that you might have been interested in. Maybe you weren't interested, but there's always that serendipity of running into something you didn't know. If all your information is being essentially processed to feed you what you've already bought, then you're going to have tremendous confirmation bias. It's like my wife's friends thinking that Israel's an apartheid state, and Arabs can't vote if they're Israeli citizens. Wrong. But are they going to hear about that at NPR? Are they going to hear about that, even in some of the, on the BBC? Probably not very much. And so they are being fed with information. The climate is a perfect example. I think the climate, there is some climate change, and there is an issue of how do we deal with it. But it's vastly over exaggerated. and a lot of the solutions are devastating to lots of people. Not the nepo babies of the NGOs. For them, it's fine. So that you keep and then there have been attempts, and was one good thing about Trump. There was a period where Reddit was thinking about, we're not going to have climate skeptics. Now, how do you define a climate skeptic? If somebody like Steve Koonin, who's a physicist, and
worked in the Obama administration,
right, and knows that there is a change in climate. But of course, as a historian, I know that there have been changes in climate in the past. During the Roman era, the temperature towards the end dropped by 3 degrees Celsius. It's twice the increase that we've had since the 19th century.
Oh, and I mean, the Washington Post published an article a couple of years ago noting and acknowledging that, to the best of at least whatever source they were drawing on, carbon as a share of the atmosphere is at a 500 million year low. But they had to spin it, and say, but the rate of increase is actually troubling, because that means if we stay at this rate of increase, well, blah 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 blah. And it's I'm open to more information at all times, because that's what science actually is. It's always provisional. But this is all just bull.
Well,
it's all just bull. There's no problem. The problem is poverty. The problems of humanity are about the things we've been talking about, but at the most basic level, it's still about 2 billion people living in extreme poverty on this planet.
Well, and
not climate change.
Right. And even if you want to deal with climate change, it's not the Western countries who are spewing the stuff out in large amounts. And you have a reduction in population growth, and now we're going to start heading down population, period. I think that I agree. I think the biggest problem facing the world is poverty and the disillusionment of people in the West and in East Asia who do not see a good future. And that, by the way, includes China.
Yeah, the thing that our conversation around the industrial might of China and the sort of Cold War 2.0 with China has this backdrop of, they have a population collapse that does seem to be like baked into the cake of just like you can't produce 30-year-olds.
Because, and when last time I spoke in Beijing, I had a chance to talk to some of the students because they had read one of my books, and they were really interested in this idea of the human city and how we could do. And they said, how do you think we live? We live in little apartments. We're under incredible pressure to produce. None of the young women I met there intended to have kids. I did a program for the government of Singapore because they brought me in to discuss it. We had a meeting at a pub in Singapore, and like 10 women from Singapore and me and a guy from the government. And the guy from the government said, well, if we gave you $100,000, would that make a difference? When we got to $1 million, he said, okay, I give up. And I asked him, I said, well, is it that people aren't getting married, they're not having kids? He said, they don't date.
No.
I mean, even now, even in a place like New York, you'll go to a nice restaurant, you'll see some absolutely attractive women, 4 of them having dinner together, and almost no couples. Except for the older cockers like me.
My very politically correct take on that is Sex in the City. So we've talked about all kinds of stuff, but among a thread is sort of elite culture. And one moment of peak elite culture, HBO is always, I think, a good way to look at it. Like, if you're watching HBO and talking about it, you're in elite culture. And I'm saying that derisively. Sex in the City. You just described Sex in the City.
Exactly.
4 beautiful, working single women all getting together for brunch. And it's a vision of what happiness is supposed to be. Well, it's a vision of what happiness is supposed to be as written and envisioned by gay men.
Right.
That's what Sex in the City is.
which essentially is what a gay men would do, except they're using women instead.
Yeah, it's just that's what that show is. That's what that show is. And
Do you know the writers?
no, but I mean, I know that that the creator is a gay man. So it's like, and that's just a fact. And it's like, you even look at the affect of it. And it's funny because like my wife and I joke about this. The super girly girl thing that looks kind of like a flamboyant gay man has always been off-putting to me. Like my wife is not super girly girl. It's kind of like a gay man. Like, I don't know about this super girly girl stuff. But that vision, even if it's not literally true that Sex and the City plays an important outsized causal role in the culture of young women today, it certainly painted a picture that has left an echo.
And it's reflected a reality that many women look at. Oh, I want to live in New York, and
I want to be Carrie, and I want to have my MacBook, and
I have my designer this, my designer that, and go to the poshest restaurants or whatever it is. And
I want to be 50 and have a dilettante with a billionaire who's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, look around. That's not.
Yeah, the billionaires aren't interested in diet starved 55-year-olds. You know, I mean, I'm sorry. You know, it's and I think you really have this culture, and I think what here's one. I'll leave you with one hopeful thing. I do think the culture is beginning to change, and partially is as my friend who is one of the biggest agents in Hollywood, and he said, I keep telling and he's very liberal. He said, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. I said, you're in the business of getting
that's the classic
eyeballs. You want to get people, and if you're going to, if Tom Cruise and his movies on what was it, the movie about the test pilots,
Top Gun. Top Gun Mavericks was
Right.
the recent sort of like, look, we're winning, we're making a comeback.
Yeah, and
It's just pro-America and fun, and it's not woke, and there's no nonsense.
and I think that they're beginning to realize that it isn't really that attractive to that many people. And having girls who beat up boys, that's I mean, I'm sure that, and having lived in Hollywood and worked in Hollywood, I can tell you, a lot of those things come from people who are, let's just say, not in happy heterosexual family relations. I'll leave it at that. And
it's the entertainment industry has always been fundamentally weird. The casting, look, to the Me Too hit our kids in ways that I haven't fully appreciated until recently, because it's like when that happened, our current 20-year-olds were in middle school. Right. So that's like peak pain.
Right.
As a young boy, you're like going through all this stuff and you're getting a boner in gym class and it's all horrible. It's like middle school's horrible. It's my son called it the Hunger Games. It's like, if New York City and is the Hunger Games of economics, like this is like the Hunger Games of social life.
Right.
is middle school. So to have that happening and have the zeitgeist be boys are toxic, culture is destroying the society, all that stuff, like you need a contract to try to kiss a girl on the cheek. So that's the milieu, if you will, that they found themselves in. And we're scratching our heads about where incel culture came from. It's like, well, what do you think is going to happen when you tell 10-year-old boys that the future is female?
Right. Right. Exactly. And I think, and then what happens is then the women find themselves at age 35 with no men. They're never going to have a family, and of course that will have economic ramifications for them as well, generally. And basically you're going to have this sort of separation of men and women. I saw a lot of that in Japan many years ago, where the men and the women are almost like, and Korea, I think, is even more extreme.
Korea's fertility rate is like 0.7.
Right.
As I understand, like Korea is over. Korea is not going to exist.
Right. I mean,
Like there's a video, this great YouTube channel, Kurzgesagt, which is these animated things. They're deeply researched. They're really great. It did a Korea is over video. And usually this channel will have some kernel of hope. It's like, no, it's like mathematically impossible. It's over.
and I remember when I was in Korea, I wanted to understand this. So I went to a Buddhist monastery, and I asked the monk, I said, it was a very famous monk at the time. And I said, why is this happening? He said, look at it this way. You work in Seoul, but you can't afford to live anywhere near Seoul. So you live in a high-rise building in the exurbs.
Yeah.
You take a train that takes you 45 minutes, a crowded train into Seoul. You work till 7, 8 o'clock at night. You come back at 9, and your mother-in-law's living there too. You think you're going to have babies? Probably not.
How you can even have a date? Come back to my place is not possible.
Right. I mean, and so now I think the one difference in Asian society, less likely to become gay and more likely to become sort of, watching video games and, living in some sort of parallel universe. But whereas the gay culture is not as strong. It's stronger in Japan.
What do you mean by that? Less likely to become gay? I'm just curious.
It seems to be less socially acceptable, so that they have a big population of single men who don't go out and don't date. The percentage of Japanese men who haven't had sex, they're in their 30s and haven't had sex ever, or they've had.
There's all these crazy pathological things happening in Japan that are below the surface that I saw another, again, like, because I'm sort of like a giant kid, I watch YouTube all the time. There was a thing about, like, okay, so a couple of things I've been made aware of recently that maybe you've encountered already. There's a word for it where 100,000 Japanese a year just vanish. They literally like pick up and leave because life is so stressful, pressured, the shame culture. And I'm kind of pro shame, but not to this extent. Being Catholic, they just vanish. They vanish. The middle age, the 80-50, where 80-year-olds are still hosting their 50-year-old single sons, who are now like, and there's a word for this one too.
Well, there's also the term for men called herbivores. That's a term for well, you can imagine, these men who are not very masculine anymore.
Yeah, and like there's like selling like bras to the men. It's like a window into like an especially acute dystopian future,
because you have no immigrants and that's one part of it. You have no immigrants who are having families and still have, sometimes toxic sexual views, but sometimes more traditional sexual views, and there's still that expectation that they're going to have a family and have kids. Japan is now so far down that road now. And Korea is even more so. I think Korea is just a harsher society than Japan. And Japan has more money because they were making their money earlier.
Yeah, they're a bigger economy.
But it's a version of what we may see in the U.S., but it'll be very different because it's a very different culture, and our demographics are not quite as horrible.
I could talk to you for another 3 hours, and we'll have to have you back as we start to wrap up this great conversation. This is a great place to sort of land the plane, because we're talking about the future. We're talking about family. And you've pointed to hopeful signs. What is as a father, as a professor, as someone that's a student of history and social trends, what is your advice to the 20-year-old young man or young woman, about the kind of vision they should have for themselves to live a fulfilling life?
Well, I think first thing you want to do is you want to go to a place where there's opportunity. I mean, that's, no, it could be, if you have a specific skill, it may not be an opportunity for everyone, but it's an opportunity for you. The second thing is you want to go to a place where you're going to possibly meet somebody of the opposite sex, and where you might be able to buy a house. Those would be, in terms of the trajectory of the post-AI world, because I think about, the kids, both my kids and the ones I teach. I think you have to do a lot of hard thinking about what is it that I can do that a machine can't do. Like, you're not going to want to get a job on an assembly line which is going to be automated the next day. Well, the same thing's true in a lot of other fields. A lot of the low-end analytics.
The McKinsey types, they're going to get crushed.
Right. I mean, the guys at the top are going to get even richer because they're going to use AI, and they're not going to have to even pay for, they'll pay, very little for the AI, and they won't have to pay for the young people. So I think that, I think you have to say, what is it that I can do that a machine can't do? What is it that I can do that uses what it is human beings have? Empathy, ability to think out of the box, be able to create something new, something that no one else. I mean, nobody would have come up with neo-feudalism. That was me. Now you could now go and ask neo-feudalism, and then you'd get a bunch of reports of other people and my work on neo-feudalism. But the originality of neo-feudalism came out of my own peculiar background. So, I think that you have to really think about what kind of life do you want to have, and I think what they don't think clearly about it. If I stay single, and I put all my effort in my career, and I'm going to live in a very expensive place, so I'm going to live in a little apartment. Just think about what it's going to be like when you're 50. Think about that. Or even, I have to say, it's my brother's 4 years older than me, doesn't have any kids. And he every once in a while, he says to me, who's going to watch after me? I know my girls will watch after me, or my wife, when we're older. My brother took care of my mother into her, and she died at 97. My sister-in-law and my wife take care of my mother-in-law, who's 95. What kind of trajectory long-term are you going to have if you want to live this particular kind of lifestyle? And they say, oh, well, I have friends. Friends aren't family. Family is family. I mean, you might have one or two very close friends, but most of these people, they've got their own stuff going on. And they're not obligated to take care of you. They'll help you if you need it. But, are you going to write a check for $30,000 for your 35-year-old to buy a house? Probably not. It's going to be your family who's going to do that.
I ask this of every guest, especially for the first time on the show. We called this Dad Saves America because I think as a man, that is the role. I'd say a role, but it is the role that we get to play if we're lucky. That really has a ripple effect.
Well, that's what what we're biologically made for.
It's it ripples. It ripples from the family to the community to the city and to the country. How do you think about your role in the American story?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that much. I mean, because I'm really a little bit, I think, not. It's hard to put, what camp am I in? Probably none. I mean, there are a few people, I think, who I feel some sympathy or some empathy with. The late Fred Siegel, who was, one of my closest friends. Certainly, Michael Lind, who lives here in Austin.
Oh, I didn't realize Michael Lind's in Austin.
Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have a lot of respect for things that, Barry Weiss is doing. I mean, I'm probably another generation out of that group. I mean, Mike is more my age, but I think that, I think I'm having some influence with young editors at Unheard, at Spiked, at the Telegraph, at the National Post, at Quillette. So I think that I'm presenting things in a way to make people think. I don't want them necessarily to agree with me. I want to. Here's my standard for good journalism or good book writing. I learned something I didn't know. If I'm reading a book and I didn't learn anything new, then it's a waste of time. Like I'll see an article and I know it's going to be in a defense of Trump, or it's going to be a defense of the Democrats, and it's going to be totally predictable. I'm hoping that even if you read an article of mine and you don't agree with it, that you learned something and it made you think. And if I did that, I did my job.
That has been my experience every time I've encountered your writing, Joel. And it has been an honor to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Thank you.